Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Kenton, Hornbeck, co-host of the BeckDeck podcast, joined alongside Logan Decker. Logan, how are we doing this week?
Doing good, man. Doing good. A lot of news with just sports in general this week. We got a lot going on. NFL free agency has definitely taken a lot of room in the media space, but we got of course, Baseball World Classic going on. We have Selection Sunday in 2 to 4 hours, somewhere in that time range. So this is one of the more exciting times of the year for an American sports fan.
Totally agree. I've been catching up on the World Baseball Classic. Yesterday I watched Venezuela unseat Japan, who was the former champions in 2023, the last time the event was held. It was really cool to see the Venezuelan national team's reactions to the victory. But you're right, March Madness, we have NFL free agency, we have opening day for Major League Baseball right around the corner. A lot happening right now in the sporting world. But first, I want to throw this at you. So, your team, the Tennessee Titans, is getting a new stadium, I believe, next year, the new Nissan Stadium in downtown Nashville. And preceding the new stadium opening is a brand new logo and color palette. What was your reaction to the Titans' new color scheme, logo? What are your thoughts? Do you like it? Do you miss the old one? What do you wish they did or did not incorporate? What are your thoughts?
I love it, man. It's one of those things when you're a part of a franchise or you're a fan of a franchise that's not maybe like the Packers, the Bears, or whatnot. Their uniforms are, for the most part, never going to change. And I would say the Colts are along that line as well. And so the Titans in the past 25 years have made major changes 3 different times at least. And this is my favorite one that they've done. Not that I didn't like the previous one where it was kind of they put a heavier emphasis on the darker tone of the blue with the powder blue, but it truly did not have enough red in it. And now I really like it's a throwback, which is my favorite uniforms of all time, so they're Oiler uniforms. So now they're bringing in that blue. They have a little bit more heavier emphasis on the white. The previous one, you could sit here and say, oh, they kind of look similar to the Patriots in the colors here. And this one, I think, makes them stand out a little bit more. I like the new logo. The secondary logo is pretty cool with the T in the end. So you could say, oh, that's Nashville, Tennessee, or that's just the abbreviation for Tennessee and the state. That one's really cool. I really do like the colors. They're bringing back more in the red. The blue is a little bit more unique. Whereas you could say it was almost the same color as New England's blue and the previous uniforms. In this one, there's not another team that has this style. Maybe the Bills are a little bit closer in this realm, but I would still say, hey, the Titans have this light blue that no other team has. The logo, great. It's simplified, but I think, them taking away the red from the flames of it and just having the iconic T there with the stars, but then having more emphasis of red in the uniform, really cool. I really like the stripes on the helmet too. That's really cool. That's probably my favorite part in terms of the uniform change. Kind of makes it stand out more. So what's your thoughts? I feel like in terms of the, Twitter, X, social media, it seems like overall NFL fans like the change.
I would echo all of those sentiments. I really like the new logo. I really like teams putting modern spins on classic uniforms and classic colorways. I think what really stands out about the Titans is the move to primarily feature the powder blue, which was a hallmark of the former Houston Oilers franchise, which is now the modern-day Titans because the Oilers moved to Tennessee in the late 90s and became the Tennessee Titans. And when they made that move, and obviously we were probably barely alive for this. We were like babies or whatever. But I felt they intentionally tried to move away from the old identity of the Houston Oilers with new colorways, new logos. They changed the name of the franchise to the Tennessee Titans. And I think, the name Tennessee Titans is, I wouldn't say generic. It's a very NFL. It's like very, the NFL is not the NBA. It doesn't need all these unique names. It's very classic. Patriots, Bears, Colts, Packers, I guess, is unique, but that's been a name forever. The Titans is kind of in that vein, and with all of the history the Houston Oilers had, I always felt like the Tennessee logo and uniforms were kind of missing the mark a little bit because they were not paying homage to what the franchise was previously. Now, I get why marketing teams and franchises do that, but what I really enjoy about the new uniforms is they maintain their Tennessee Titans identity with the T on the logo, meaning, Tennessee Titans. They have the 3 stars on it, which is symbolic on the state flag of Tennessee, that's a callback to what their logo was prior. But I really think this new logo incorporates a lot of it very well. It's a shield. I think even though circle logos are played out a little bit, you really can't go wrong with it. And the colors, the red, the blue, the white, those are iconic. It really takes the Titans back to an era that I think a lot of older fans were reminiscent of, but also I think this is a good way to jump into the new era with the new stadium and give it a new, fresh look. It's really nice to see sports teams trying to connect eras, and I think this is the best of both worlds. One of the things I really dislike about what the NBA does, and specifically Nike, is there's so many unique uniforms. It looks like they're just trying stuff, and sometimes they're just missing the mark completely. I think what the NFL gets right is that, and by the way, there are less games in the NFL, so there's less time to mess all this stuff up. But with the NBA, there's 82 games. You can take a little bit more chances. Not as many people are paying attention to the the back-to-backs or the 82-game regular season. So some of these jerseys get lost in the shuffle and become just a trivia answer. But the NFL, for its credit, knows that their fans want classic jerseys. The Browns are the Browns. When they moved away to having, I think in like the Johnny Manziel era, I'll call it, where it just said Browns across the front, it looked so tacky. It looked terrible. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had those weird alarm clock numbers at one point in time during the Jameis Winston era. Those were freaking terrible. They moved back when Tom Brady came back to the classic Buccaneers that we all remember from the early 2000s when they won the Super Bowl. The Jaguars still haven't gotten their uniforms right, but I feel like they're going to make a move back to their late 90s jerseys, which are iconic with the big cat on the sleeve. Sometimes taking new jerseys into a different direction or an alternate direction is right. Like I think the Bengals did a really good job with their rebrand. But in kind of closing here, you're essentially reintroducing the Houston Oilers back into the NFL. And the Titans' last uniforms, I think they worked for about 2 years and then they got dated. And Nike and this kind of like retro wave that we're in right now, I think they understand that. We don't need to be changing uniforms all the time just to sell merchandise. The Falcons need to go back to block numbers with red helmets. This ridiculous gradient that they had, all of that needs to be shelved. No fans want it. It doesn't bridge generations. There's a reason why the New York Yankees and the Green Bay Packers don't change their jerseys. So in essence, I like the Titans jersey. You guys got a good one.
Yeah, it's just, it's perfect timing in terms of, hey, new stadium. We have a new face of the franchise with Cam Ward. And it's a regime change as well with somebody we're really hopeful for with Saleh. And then I think my favorite part about this is in terms of our division, the one team in our division that I'm not going to sit here and say I don't take seriously, but I've never been like, oh, they're a rival, is the Houston Texans. However, the one thing that the Houston Texans fan base does, or did, that really, really pissed me off was that they're like, oh, we should be able to have the Oilers uniforms. I'm like, no, because when Tennessee originally, I should say, when Houston Oilers originally moved to Tennessee, they were actually the Oilers for 1 year before becoming the Titans. So that's something that the part of the history of that, whether going through with so many historical players that they've had, the Texans don't deserve that because they are a new franchise. They don't get to take our old history of it. So now this is kind of a point in my eyes that, like, hey, the colors, the throwbacks, which is what they were, are now ours, permanent. Texans never deserve to have these. So that's kind of my fork in the ground. That's the one thing I always despise Texans fans for, acting like they should own those colorways and that it's their history when it's not.
Really quick, the next team that needs to make a logo and uniform change, just a total rebrand, is the Washington Commanders, who have these weird holdover uniforms from the Dan Snyder sale, and it just looks terrible. This weird W logo, it just looks ridiculous and crass, and I don't really enjoy it. Other than that, I mean, maybe the Rams could use a rebrand, but the Dolphins certainly need to go back to their old logo, the weird, futuristic-looking dolphin jumping through the sun, all of that. I mean, I think everyone else in the NFL is doing pretty good right now. The Bears changed back to their actual, bear logo, which is good. And, simple is better for these uniforms and logos, and I think the NFL generally gets it right, as opposed to the NBA, which just rolls out slop on a cart every week, and the fans are overall rejecting it. It makes good to show up to a frat party in, not a actual game, in my opinion.
Would you prefer if Washington did like a rebrand kind of deal, or do you want them to change the name again to go back to the football team? Obviously, the Redskins, I don't think is ever coming back. But would you want them to keep the Commanders, go back to the football team, or do something completely different again? I don't think they could do something completely different again, but
when they first introduced the name the Commanders, I was not a big fan of it. But now that it's been that way since 2022, we're kind of 4 or 5 years in, I don't think a new name would really do anything. To me, they're always going to be the Redskins, but now they're the Commanders, whatever. I just think they need a new logo, a new jersey. Keep the classic color palette because they have one of the best color palettes. The yellow and the maroon is fantastic. And what I really wish they would do is kind of like what the Titans did. Even though the name Commanders is nowhere close to the Redskins or anything like that, it's still kind of it's a generic name. They're commanders of Native American tribes who fought in wars. You know what I mean? You could still, that's still like a chieftain, like a warrior kind of name. It's generic. It can go across boundaries. It can go to Roman soldiers to whatever. So what I would like them to do is call back to their Native American heritage through the logo. I almost wish on the helmet they would kind of do what Florida State does with the spear and the feather. I think that would be awesome. And then with the primary, you can you can kind of get creative with it. But whatever they're doing now simply does not work, in my opinion. I think a circle with, I don't know, there doesn't have to be a person. It could just be, a W or like a Washington Nationals type W with the feather coming off the back. Paying homage to that history, I think, is really where you need to go with it. And the other thing about their jerseys is go back to what the Washington Redskins were wearing in the first place. These were jerseys that did not change for decades and decades and decades. The kind of reddish maroon. Why they had these weird black uniforms and this weird font, all of that is garbage. Dump it. Go back to classic Washington uniforms. Even though you're called the Commanders, you can still, kind of like what the Titans were doing, be unique and pay homage to the history of the franchise you don't have to alienate yourself from that totally. And I think there's probably going to be some movement here in the next year or two for them to change their uniforms and logo. But as far as the name the Commanders goes, I don't love it, but they are who they are now, and I think they should just roll with it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point because they've had the Commanders for a long time. The football team was funny at first, but I think a lot of people in the D.C. area kind of clung on to it. But I think enough time has passed to be like, can we really afford to change this again within this time frame? But yeah, I definitely agree. I do think there's some other teams that could deal with some rebrands, or like Miami, embrace some of their historical parts of their franchise, bring back some of the uniforms. Maybe you can make the same argument about the Buccaneers and the Creamsicles jerseys. Everybody loves those jerseys. We'll see. I'm sure we'll see some changes in the next few years with maybe some other teams looking at stadium changes or whatnot. So I figured we'd jump right into the NFL free agency. And, of course, we kind of got the big moves out of the way last weekend, and now we're kind of seeing – I don't want to say free agency is done, but it's like 95% done. So we're kind of – now we can discuss about everybody's signings. We can talk about what other teams have lost, what they've gained. And there's a lot of guys that have went around the carousel this year. So my thought process was, instead of going team by team, I'm going to go by division. Just kind of, and you pick up what, like, oh, that's a key add, that's a key loss, whatever you want to talk about on a player-wise. So I figured that'd be the easiest way. Otherwise, we might be here till like 9 o'clock trying to do this.
Totally. And before we do that, I want to get your reaction to this again, because I don't believe we've talked about this on the podcast yet. And I don't mean to throw the segment off, because we'll revisit it. But the offseason moves. The Ravens canceled their trade for Max Crosby. We had not spoken about this yet on the podcast. 2 first-round picks for Max Crosby to send him from Las Vegas to Baltimore. Baltimore backs out of the trade. The next day, they sign former Bengal Trey Hendrickson. What is your reaction to this? I'm seeing a lot of dogpiling on Baltimore. I can't say that I disagree with a lot of those criticisms. What do you think about it?
I think Baltimore knew what they were doing. I think this was intentional. However, nothing is finalized until I believe it was Wednesday. And they decided to basically back out of this trade. And what I think where the controversy comes from, it's the fact that so many other teams, including your team, the Colts, were talking with Trey Hendrickson. And various other teams were as well. And it messed up the defensive end market right there. In terms of, well, what if Max Crosby is more hurt than we think? He had a meniscus repair surgery in January. Let's just say the average recovery, it's going to take him probably 6 months. The Ravens knew, like, what do you? He's going to fail the physical. He can't run right now. He can't jump. He can't cut. It's even if he's further progressed than that, let's just say he had in the middle of January. That's 8 weeks. In terms of the medical recovery of it, he's not doing any of that by now. So it was one of those things that when I heard it, I was like, well, yeah, no shit. He failed the physical. He can't do any of that right now. That was part of, you knew this coming in. Now, for them, I think they were probably like, with the amount of players that they had lost, that they probably didn't think was going to happen. I think this is what happened. They have all these guys. They're hoping to re-sign some of them. They didn't re-sign anybody. And they're like, well, we really need these picks to make sure we fill the gaps in the roster. And we're just giving up, 2 ones. And they kind of looked and they said, hey, we know Trey Hendrickson. He played against us for several years, and he could be a good addition. And basically they signed him to the base contract of what Max Crosby is already getting paid right now. So I would say it is, in terms of team relations, is it kind of shitty? Yes. However, there's no rule against it. Do you think the NFL wants to stop this? No. We're having, basketball, college basketball conference tournaments going on. We have the World Classics for baseball. Golf is in full swing. And what's the number one thing talked about this entire week in sports media? It's the Max Crosby trade. The NFL is not going to stop this. If anything, they're like, yeah, keep doing this. This is actually really good. You're bringing eyes onto the sport, seeing what's going on. So initially, I thought it was more of a scumbag move, to be honest, with the Ravens, and to a degree, I still do, but I completely understand why they did it. What I'm curious about now is two things: is Max Crosby going to stay with the Raiders? Is there going to be another team? Because Dallas was interested at one point; they'd offered a first and a second. And I think because of this, you could make the argument that Max Crosby's trade value technically would have went down, because you have this Ravens organization and their doctor saying we don't like it. The independent doctor who said that he doesn't like it either is actually the head physician for the Cowboys as well. So, put the tinfoil hat on. Maybe, Dallas is trying to, or another team will kind of jump this opportunity to maybe offer lower value picks to get Max Crosby out of it. But in the end, despite all the money that the Raiders had paid all these free agents to come in, them having Max Crosby back doesn't put them in a bad spot. They still have like $20 million, so you have, $25 million in cap space available. So it doesn't necessarily hurt them to do that. I just think that the Raiders are at this point where it's like, hey, let's get as much youth as we can. I mean, 2 first-round draft picks for a 30-year-old defensive end that is, quite frankly, I still think he's very good, but he's not in his prime anymore. He's not putting up the same sack and pressure numbers, but he's still a monster. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Max Crosby is like off the cliff, and I'm like, no, he just hasn't been as productive. And part of that's been injuries with him. But I know that Indy wasn't happy with it. I know that I'm trying to think of some other teams. I know Miami wasn't happy with it. I know basically Hendrickson was a highly valued, because he was a pass rusher, the best available, with Max Crosby being off the table. And then all of a sudden everything reversed. And now you have the Buffalo Bills were a team that was looking at Hendrickson, and they had basically signed Bradley Chubb as a replacement instead. So it kind of shifted the market, and there's a lot of teams that aren't happy with the Ravens, but that's the game. I don't know if you have the same thought process, or kind of if you had an initial reaction like I did, and then I thought about it some more, kind of got some more info, and then I've changed it.
This has happened before in pro sports. I mean, I can remember when the Charlotte Hornets were going to trade center Mark Williams to the Los Angeles Lakers for, I think Dalton Connect was part of that deal, and then they backed out of it because of a physical. And this reminds me of a much more major version of that. Max Crosby obviously was not healthy. I think, like you were saying, I'm kind of on parallel thinking here. Nothing was finalized yet, so they were able to make this move. I believe a lot of people were upset, mainly the fan base of whoever, the Ravens, the Raiders, people in the NFL. It's not a very professional move. It kind of takes people by surprise. And I think that's where a lot of the outrage is, even though it is legal to do. I believe that Max Crosby, personally, and I think he's a great player, is not worth 2 first-round picks. I don't think NFL teams should be giving away 2 first-round picks in back-to-back years. You are handicapping your franchise. Football is so much more. There's 22 unique positions on the field, not even counting special teams. So you need those high draft picks to fill out your roster with talented players and getting them on cheap contracts. And for Max Crosby, who's 30 years old, the Ravens are in win now mode, but I think they're a little over the hill. I don't know why they thought it would be necessary to give up 2 first-round picks. And I'll parlay that with when the Colts gave up 2 first-round picks for Sauce Gardner, I was not sure that was the right move. Now, Sauce Gardner, getting him on the team, great corner, love that. We obviously suffered a great deal toward the end of the season because Daniel Jones got hurt, and that was a win-now move. They were like, hey, we're pushing all our chips in, let's go for it. And then the quarterback gets hurt and everything flames out, and it was not the same team. But still, in hindsight, giving away 2 first-round picks looks crazy because the Colts did not finish like 12-5 or whatever and, tailed off a little bit. They absolutely tanked. And they really, really need those draft picks, especially in the middle of the first round. And the Ravens are obviously better than Indianapolis, but with all they lost on defense, I think being a big part of that, and guys not resigning in free agency, to lose 2 prime first-round picks like that is crazy. Now, maybe if you give up a first and a third or maybe a player in there or something, I can get behind that a little more. But I think they got a little spooked by the draft capital they gave away. And the other thing, and I don't know if this is verified or not, so forgive me, Logan and audience, if this is not true, but I read something on Twitter that essentially said that Max Crosby was already in the building in Baltimore, kind of going through the facility, and then the news, no, Trey Hendrickson was in the building in Baltimore while Max Crosby was also in Baltimore, and they pulled out of the trade. So they already had this kind of set up, and I think those timelines intersecting makes everybody feel a little, icky about the whole situation. But is it against the rules? No. I actually think this works out slightly better for the Ravens, and overall, it's a unique situation. It's got us talking about it on the podcast. It was cool for social media, but I think it worked out. I have no idea where Max Crosby is going to end up. I mean, I guess he could still come back and play for the Raiders if he wants to do that. But as far as the Ravens go, I like the Trey Hendrickson move. He's not going to be great in, run defense. He's struggled a little bit with that over the past couple of years. I think his sack numbers are a little overinflated personally, but if you're Baltimore, you get a good defensive end, and you can't be mad about that.
No, I mean, it wouldn't. I'm surprised, and maybe this starts something where maybe we see this a little bit more frequently. This has happened in the NFL before. It happened, I want to say 2018, 2019 with the Packers, and I want to say this happened in the early 2000s with another team. But this is hands down kind of the biggest player that has been involved in this type of situation. And I think that's why it's kind of sending shockwaves throughout the league and social media. I don't, when I say I think this happens more frequently, I don't think this is an every year thing. I think we just might see this every handful of years, especially when a guy is coming off of an injury or a surgery. Most of the time when this happens, though, usually they will do the medical kind of, whatever you want to call it, the physical, prior to even doing the trade. So I guess, that's why we don't hear it as often. But I think Baltimore just initially was this is a really good chance to do this. Let's pull the trigger. And then, like you said, I can't confirm or deny, but it wouldn't surprise me. Maybe they had Hendrickson in the building, and it was going really well. And Hendrickson was yeah, I'll sign this contract. Basically, gave him word. That's I want to be a Baltimore Raven. Maybe that's part of. Hey, he still got paid pretty good money to be with Baltimore, but maybe he's got some extra incentive against the Bengals. He's never vocalized it, but it wouldn't necessarily surprise me that maybe a player that played for your rival is getting dragged by him, and he's yeah, I want to stay in the division. And I'm going to go ahead and say early prediction, hot take. I think with Trey Hendrickson, if he stays healthy, he will get 5 sacks this year against the Bengals. So they'll play him twice. He's going to get 5 sacks between those 2 games. That's my thought process, and I think we're going to see Trey supercharged. I really, really think that. So I'm really looking forward to those divisional games coming up. I think that's a storyline that nationally isn't talking about, but I guarantee you, group text, people in the division, or fans of those teams, when that week comes up, they're going to be like, okay, can we stop Trey? Or, whatever it is, it's going to be an interesting conversation. But yeah, it's we'll see more of this in the future, I think. My main point. Very interesting scenario, but like it, love it. Good news for us. I figured, let's dive in real quick. So we're going to go from the AFC East first. So we've already talked about some of them. I'm going to talk about the highlight players. I'm not going to talk about like Buffalo signing Kyle Allen to be the backup. Like I don't, maybe it'll impact at some point, but for true downs, whatever it might be. So because of the Max Crosby ordeal and Trey Hendrickson, they decided to sign pass rusher Bradley Chubb from the Dolphins, former Bronco as well, to a 3-year deal, $43.5 million deal. Super talented guy, but injuries has hampered him the past 2 to 3 years. And they had to largely make this move because they just lost Joey Bosa in free agency. They also signed cornerback D. Alford. They re-signed Sam Franklin. They brought in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson on a 1-year deal. And I would say the biggest takeaways is that they were able to fill a decent amount of holes. They bring in DJ Moore. We talked about that last week. But they traded Taron Johnson, one of their corners. They they lost Dane Jackson. So it wouldn't surprise me with some of the losses in the secondary that we could see Buffalo maybe go back to that well at some point in the draft. But I would say that's probably the biggest hole going into the draft that we're having here. So with Miami, they cut Tua, and they decided to bring in quarterback Malik Willis from Green Bay, who shined in a few of his starts here and there. Former Titans quarterback as well. 3-year deal, $67.5. I think that's a really good placeholder while they try to figure out what they need to do the next few years, because they're not a year or two away from building back this roster. They did bring in Tutu Atwell, who is a good depth piece at wide receiver. He'll get some time. They re-signed Greg Dulcich. And they brought in Josh Uche, Willie Gay Jr., Lonnie Johnson, Zane Anderson, basically a bunch of guys to help pad out this defense because it was an atrocious defense last year. So not a lot of big names, but some guys to fill in the gaps, and they need that while they try to figure out what they want to do in the future. So New England got one of my favorite guards coming into this free agency class with Elijah Vera Tucker coming from the Jets, 3-year deal, $42 million. Fantastic guard, has had health problems the past 2 years. I really want the Titans to go after him. Just didn't happen. They also signed another pass catcher, Romeo Dobbs, 4 years, $70 million contract for him. I mean, I feel like it's just the wide receiver market at this point where it's going to balloon, but do I like Dobbs? Yeah, I think he's a really good kind of 2 wide receiver there. Do they have a 1? No, but I think Dobbs is going to be coming into that wide receiver camp, potentially being their number 1. I think you could do worse. They did sign a defensive lineman, Dramont Jones, 3-year, $39.5 million deal. They bring back Kevin Beard, who was with the Bears, and he was a longtime player under Mike Vrabel with the Titans, 1-year deal. So they, added some notable pieces. In terms of the cap here with them, because they had a fair amount of money coming in, if I can find them here. Yeah, they still have about $45 million left, so I don't think they're necessarily done. They might fill in some more gap pieces here, but it's really good. We're going to have to see what they do in the draft. Maybe that's probably adding another pass catcher. Maybe adding a little bit more to that offensive line. And maybe just adding depth on that defensive line. Now, the last team in the division, New York Jets, it's kind of wild how Geno Smith comes back home. He was traded with the Raiders for a 7th-round pick in exchange for a 6th-round selection. You know what? It's going to be the best. It's funny to say that it's going to be the best quarterback that they've had probably since, oh man, maybe glimpses of Aaron Rodgers, honestly. But before that, we'll see. I think
Ryan
he's got
Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, probably Ryan Fitzpatrick is the best answer there. But besides him, they kind of went in for a lot of death pieces to try to rebuild this defense. They signed Kingsley Enagbare, 1-year deal, defensive end, former Bengal. Joseph Asai, 3-year deal. David Onyemata helped shore up. They made that trade for Devontae Sweat. So they basically rebuilt this D-line after getting rid of all these pieces. They signed arguable Hall of Famer, future Hall of Famer, Demario Davis to a 2-year deal. The Iron Man. I believe he's like, when you look at linebackers in terms of age, I want to say he's the oldest active linebacker in the league. But the dude just does not get hurt. Just a solid piece, a long-time Saint. They had a couple guys, Deshaun Wright, corner, a few safeties. They traded for Minka Fitzpatrick for a 6th-rounder. They gave him a 3-year, $40 million extension. That's a pretty big money bag drop. But they got him back, signed Andre Sisco, Dane Belton. So they kind of just went I don't want to say all in, but they added so many guys just to try to pad out this defense. So in terms of, they did sign Dylan Parham to guard, solid piece. Not going to change the world or anything like that, but very solid starter. And they still got $36 million in the cap as well. All right, what is your reaction to the moves in the AFC East?
Fuck the AFC East. No, I think Buffalo made some nice moves. I like, obviously, the re-signing of Dawson Knox, who I think still has more to give for Buffalo, and I think he's a important locker room piece there. We talked about the DJ Moore trade a little bit last week, but I think Buffalo has really made enough moves to keep them kind of in the mix there, getting some good continuity, but also some good pieces from free agency to still be in contention, even with their new head coach, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, you mentioned, Sam Franklin. I mean, these are very, very solid moves. I think as far as, Miami, I don't really know what Miami's going to be. Tutu Atwell, that's fun. That's interesting. But I feel like he's a kind of player that he reminds me of the late Rondale Moore. Like, he's one of these guys who probably should have been on the Dolphins when Mike McDaniel was the coach there. But I don't really have a good feel on Miami. They're completely restarting. I think they're just kind of filling out defensive spots. I do think Lonnie Johnson and Josh Uche are pretty solid players. Obviously Willie Gay. And I think really for Miami, the biggest signing has been Malik Willis from the Packers, who a couple of years ago was projected to be a first-round draft pick coming out of Liberty. Didn't quite show everybody that and went in a later round. He played for the Titans, I believe, right? And then he just didn't really show much at all. He looked completely raw, and he flamed out there, he ended up in Green Bay, and then he had some good, bright moments there in Green Bay. And now I think Malik is ready to start in the NFL. We'll see how well it goes. The deck is stacked against him, especially in Miami, who's essentially entering a rebuild. But I think them choosing Malik Willis was an interesting choice because he's more of a prototypical pocket passing quarterback. Tua was very efficient, but also mediocre, and I think Malik Willis has more physical tools, which doesn't always translate to great quarterback play, but I think it allows them to take a little more chances on offense, even though they don't have a creative schemer in the mix like Mike McDaniel. New England, they are keeping some of the band together. One thing I don't know if you mentioned this or not, they let go of Stephon Diggs, who was their number one receiver. They'll probably draft a receiver at some point who, I think they definitely need receiving help, but Stephon Diggs just didn't work in New England. He had a pretty good season, but he was clashing with, he's still immature. I mean, he was doing pink cocaine, allegedly, dating Cardi B. He was a circus. I don't think New England really wants the circus in town. Obviously, they had Aaron Hernandez at one point in time, so they know all about that. But with that said, Kevin Byard, another nice signing. He's been a really solid player for a really long time. I think Kevin Byard in Tennessee was probably one of the more underrated safeties in the league and has played himself into a really valuable veteran piece for a lot of defenses. He's played on a few teams. I think New England is getting a good one there. Elijah Vera Tucker, another right guard. They really needed some offensive line help. I think that helps them a bunch. We hear all the time about Will Campbell's short arms, so they just need all the help they can get up there. And then finally the Jets. I don't really have anything to say about the Jets besides I think it's really. Oh, they did. I will say this: Minkah Fitzpatrick for essentially nothing was kind of interesting. Also, Geno Smith, full circle for Geno Smith. I mean, this is the end of the rope for him. I mean, this is probably his last stop on the Greyhound bus before he gets off of it forever. I can't imagine this season going well for Geno. The coach is not very good, and this is probably his last hurrah. He played horrible for the Raiders. I blame a lot of that on himself, but also Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly, who's just a complete embarrassment to the National Football League at this point. Geno started off his career in New York. I guess if you're unfamiliar, he looked horrible. He was a bad player. He was an objectively bad player. And then he became arguably the first one of these modern redemption stories at the quarterback position where he bounced around the league as a backup. I think he played for like San Diego or the LA Chargers at one point in time. He goes to Seattle. He backs up Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson gets traded to Denver. They thrust Geno Smith into a starting role. He had been familiar with Pete Carroll's system, knew how to run the offense, and lo and behold, he became a very, very above average quarterback. I think it even netted him a few Pro Bowl seasons in there, one or two. I thought actually he may have been a good quarterback for the Raiders at the start of last season, but it didn't work out. There was too much dysfunction with the offense, with the coaching staff. I think Geno now, we'll see what he's got. I just think it's really interesting that he finally gets to play for the Jets again, and he will be, like we were kind of alluding to earlier, the best quarterback they've had in quite some time. So maybe, I guess you can count Aaron Rodgers that 1 year, but, he's barely a Jets quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Geno Smith and the Jets, I forget the other player involved in the incident, but I'm always reminded of how he got his jaw broken in a locker room fight.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, so he had to roll around like Kanye with, the wires holding his jaw together. So hopefully it doesn't happen again. That'd be wild if it did. And also the comparison to Stephon Diggs to Aaron Hernandez is wild, but...
No. I mean, I guess I was kind of making that analogy, but I was kind of saying that all of the circus that he brings with him and that he can create.
I know what you were meaning.
Yeah.
I had to highlight it, though. I was like, yo.
They're the same guy. They're one and the same. I don't know what you mean.
We're only a couple years away, apparently. Jumping to the AFC North, a little bit quieter as a division as a whole. Definitely some notable names signed or traded. We'll start with the Ravens. They re-signed Pro Bowl quarterback Tyler Huntley. They did bring in offensive lineman John Simpson, 3-year, $30 million deal. Obviously, we have mentioned Trey Hendrickson deal, 4-year, $112 million, $60 million guaranteed. They bring in former Bengal and former Titan corner Chidobe Awuzie on a 1-year deal. They re-signed him, 1-year, $5 million contract. They signed Jalen Hawkins as a safety. Bengals, they did give Orlando Brown Jr. a 2-year, $32 million extension. They re-signed Dalton Risner. I mentioned that last week. They signed Boye Mafe from the Seahawks, 3 years, $60 million deal. Very, very solid piece. Need guys on that defensive line. They did sign Jonathan Allen, who's a longtime commander. I believe he's also a multi-time Pro Bowler, too. 2-year, $26 million deal. That's a nice piece to add. I'd say the other big one they got safety Brian Cook from Kansas City, also UC Bearcat alum, 3-year, $40 million deal. So that'll be nice from the secondary help. They've definitely they've gotten rid of some guys too that you could argue were problems on that defense, such as like Geno Stone. I can go down the list. Cleveland Browns, they padded up this offensive line. So they signed guard Zion Johnson, 3-year, $49.5 million deal. Elgton Jenkins, who I believe is from the Packers, 2-year, $24 million deal. They bring in Quincy Williams, 2-year, $13 million deal. So padding up that O-line, that's, hey, defense is looking great. Make the offense try to match it. This is a very underrated signing by the Steelers, but I thought this is a fantastic contract and a hell of a player was Rico Dowdle, 2-year, $12 million deal. Not going to hurt the bank, but I could see him really working out in that offensive scheme. They did trade with your Colts to get Michael Pittman. We had mentioned that last week that you thought Pittman was out of the door, and it happened. Basically, 7th round, 6th round exchange. He gets a new contract, 3-year deal with Pittsburgh, $59 million. This is wild to me. They re-signed Cameron Hayward to a 2-year, $32 million contract. Not saying that he doesn't deserve it, but God, Cameron Hayward feels like he's been around forever. And then they bring in some guys, re-sign some guys on the defense. Cole Holcomb, Jamal Dean, corner, 3-year deal, 36. Re-sign Asante Samuel Jr., bringing in Jaquan Brisker, Darnell Savage. A couple key pieces on offense as weapons, and they're padding up that defense there. So for the AFC North, anything jump out to you?
I really like what Cincinnati did. I think they've taken some good steps in rebuilding their horrid defense from last season. I believe I said on last week's podcast that Brian Cook was somebody they should target to sign, and he ended up signing there. I also really like the addition of Jonathan Allen along the defensive line. I think he's an underrated player, even though he's a veteran in the league, kind of on probably the back end of his career. I think he still has some downs to give, especially for a team in need at that position like the Bengals. They signed Josh Johnson to be their backup quarterback. I'm not a big fan of that. I know this is kind of nitpicky. To me, Johnson, I get why teams sign him. I think they could have, with Joe Burrow's health constantly hanging in the balance, I would not trust a player like Josh Johnson to keep the ship steady if Joe Burrow misses any significant portion of time. Now, you could argue that they're going to be out anyway if that happens, but besides a game, I really wouldn't trust a player like Josh Johnson. I think they could have upgraded at that position, and that could have helped them a little more. And then finally, who was the last guy they signed? They did make one more signing. Oh, Boye Mafe from the Seattle Seahawks. That was a good signing. I really liked that. I think he is an underrated player. I'm sure people have thrown that word around constantly when it comes to him, but he is the kind of player the Bengals need. And I know his sack numbers aren't very high, but he does have a really high win rate on 1v1s. I'm pretty sure I saw a stat like that. Oh, no, I think the Bengals have done pretty good so far this offseason in addressing some key needs. With the Browns, they got some offensive line help. They signed Quincy Williams, Zion Johnson, Tevin Jenkins. So they're really trying to rebuild that offensive line. I mean, I believe I said this before. To me, they can do all they want. This just really doesn't do anything for me until they have a better quarterback. And that's really all I have to say about Cleveland. I mean, Pittsburgh, Michael Pittman Jr., I think that's a good move for Pittsburgh. He's kind of a role player. He is really solid, but he's not going to give you more than solid. And I don't think Steelers fans should expect more than that from him. Another good signing for Pittsburgh, I think, is Jamel Dean, really solid corner, kind of build out the defensive backfield there. They also got Darnell Savage from Buffalo, which I like. I like that move. Rico Dowdle, he'll be able to have like a bigger role in that offense. I think he's one of the most underrated running backs in the league, and I think Pittsburgh getting him is kind of a steal. He was in no man's land last year, even though the Panthers made the playoffs and they ended up relying a lot on Rico Dowdle. I don't think he still gets talked. He doesn't really get talked about enough, and I think he's a little better than his reputation is. But he's done some good things to like help repair that. And then for Baltimore, we kind of hit on Baltimore a little bit earlier. They get Trey Hendrickson. That's obviously the big one. I think that's a good signing. Durham Smythe, the tight end, he's kind of a whatever. Re-signed Chidobe Awuzie, solid cornerback. Get Jalen Hawkins from the Patriots. That's fine. And then Tyler Huntley. The Ravens are kind of opting towards continuity. Keaton Mitchell at running back. Or, excuse me, they lost Keaton Mitchell. I apologize about that. The Ravens, they just don't do really that much for me. I think the Ravens are primed for regression next year. I think Trey Hendrickson is not going to be the reason for that, but I just don't see this team, even with a new coach. It just feels like kind of more of the same, and if anything, they're a worse version of what they were, which was pretty good. So I don't really know where they go from here. I think eventually they're going to have to move on from Lamar Jackson. I don't think he's going to be a Baltimore lifer as much as fans want him to be. I think it would be better for the Ravens to move on from him in about a year or two. You could say the same for the Cincinnati Bengals regarding Joe Burrow. But at this point in time, I don't feel like the Ravens are very dynamic, and they lost kind of their locker room's going to be fine, but it feels like they got a Harbaugh retread, and unless Jesse Minter just comes in here and does some really, really good things, I just feel like the Ravens are primed for regression.
That's man, you threw out Joe and Lamar on that get out of town train. I will say with the Ravens, though, some of the key losses that I didn't know, obviously Tyler Linderbaum, fantastic center. They've lost their Isaiah Likely, a physical phenom at tight end to the Giants. Let Keaton Mitchell walk. Lost safety Alohi Gilman, defensive tackle Dramonte Jones, edge Kyle Van Noy, Patrick Ricard, long-time fullback for him, edge David Ojabo. The Ravens feel like a team that has lost more this free agency than they've been able to piece back in. Now, if they draft really well, they're still going to be in contention. I still think they're in contention, but man, we know how tough this division is. The Bengals are going to be fighting here. We'll have to see what they do in the draft, but I still feel like they're going to go a little bit heavy on the defensive side, try to pad it up as much as they can. Pittsburgh is a very interesting scenario based on who they get back at quarterback. I do think that Aaron Rodgers will be back there again, but he likes to take his time, so we'll see. If not, I think the Steelers would panic because who else are going to get to fill that spot? But, hey, bringing in Rico, Pittman, another weapon over the field in the zones, be good for him. I just think this is – and in Cleveland, that's a lot of offensive line help that they've brought in. I'm kind of, not that I'm sitting here saying that, like, oh, let's see what Shedeur says. I'm like, if Cleveland just put up, let's just say, a touchdown more a game, like, they would actually be a true threat in that division. If they could just get some momentum going on offense, just because their defense is so scary, they could be a very interesting team. I'm not predicting anything crazy, but this is going to be once again a bloodbath of a division. I just feel like the top got closer to the median and the bottom just got closer to the median there. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't think the Browns are going to be as bad as maybe people think they will be next year. I think they'll be competitive in almost every game they're in.
I want to say this really quick about the trade Lamar thing. It's not that I think when I say the Ravens are primed for regression, I just don't. I see them kind of being a fringe playoff team next year. I don't think they're going to like implode or anything. I still think they'll be good, but I just don't think they're going to be as good as they have been. Now, when I said at a certain point, I think even maybe less with the Bengals, although the national media is going to push that like trade Joe Burrow thing and, maybe ask for a trade, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. I don't want to get into all that. Although I think you've certainly heard stuff in the media. The Lamar contract stuff has been weird for a long time. He does not have an agent, I don't believe. And the Ravens, I think, are kind of stuck with him at quarterback. And not to go too far into this because I want to get into the next division. All I'm going to say is I think trading Lamar Jackson, especially after this offseason, unless they do very well, is going to be talked about more and more in the national media, and I think Ravens fans should prepare themselves for that. And I think it's something that maybe not next season, and when I say next season, I mean this coming offseason, after this current season, you're going to start to hear bubblings about it. Then after that subsequent season, I think you're really going to start hearing stuff about it, unless they just play really, really well. So this is a lot of hypotheticals, but I feel like the Ravens are kind of stuck right now. I think there's a kind of malaise about the Ravens, and they just don't have a lot of aura right now. I think that's kind of a stupid way to look at it, but they just kind of feel bland and stale, and they may need to consider moving on from Lamar Jackson and starting over if they're not able to pile some serious playoff wins in the coming years.
I mean, I think it's a fair point because the Ravens feel, at least from the outside looking in, that they're kind of on this teetering point where they're like, hey, what does this look like in 2 years if we're having the same result? And then with it, we'll have to see. Like you said, they're bringing in Jesse Minter. How much is he going to change the culture and the atmosphere there when it's just very tough for any NFL coach, new head coach coming in to replace a long-term regime. We'll have to see how this goes. That's but it is kind of setting up for something potentially in the future to happen the next 2 to 3 years. I agree with you on that take. Something has to change. Jumping on to our division, man, the Texans were busy. Well, we already mentioned that they had traded for David Montgomery. They re-signed Dalton Schultz. We talked about that, re-signing Trent Brown. They also bring in tackle Evan Brown, tackle Braden Smith. They re-signed guard Ed Ingram, so they have padded up this offensive line. We'll see how well they perform, but they've got the pieces in there. I've already mentioned last week that they signed a very underrated pass rusher in Daniel Hunter, who's phenomenal. You could make the argument he's quietly in a top 5, depending on, I think Houston fans would mention that, and I think they have a talking piece in that conversation. But on the D-line, man, they signed defensive end Logan Hall. They bring in Dominic Robinson, those tackles, Naquan Jones, Sheldon Rankins, linebacker E.J. Speed. They re-signed him. They re-signed a bunch of guys on their D-line. They bring in Reed Blankenship from Philly to play their safety spot. They re-signed MJ Stewart. They re-signed all their special teams guys. Man, this defense is not going away. It's scary, and we'll have to see how good their offensive line is. But, hey, I think the main point is their quarterback play. What does C.J. Stroud look like? Because if he can at least put it together, man, that team's going to go further than they did last year. Going on with the Colts here, they did do a re-sign with Daniel Jones, 2-year, $88 million. Whew, that's a lot of money. With $100 million with incentives, basically includes $60 million guaranteed. So you have Daniel Jones locked down. You've also signed, even though it's a lot of money, I think it is a good re-signing with Alec Pierce, wide receiver. I was really hoping he would get out on the market, but he is a fantastic player, and I think his role will expand very much so, along with Downs, their other wide receiver, with Pittman now. It's almost like you had too many mouths to feed, and now you've got your core guys right there. They brought in some defensive pieces. Edge Arden Key's he's been a solid edge rusher, 2-year deal, $20 million. They signed Michael Clemens. I don't know why you've re-signed Laquan Treadwell, but you did. Brought in Derek Nottie. You traded with Green Bay. This was that Colby Wooden signing. You signed Jonathan Owens at your safety position. Jacksonville's been extremely quiet. They basically did a bunch of re-signs. Monteric Brown, corner, Matt Dickerson, defensive line, Dennis Gardeck, edge. They re-signed DJ Dallas. The only free agent move that they've made, at least to my knowledge at this point, signing somebody else, is Chris Rodriguez Jr., 2-year deal, $10 million, which tells me committee or Bashan Tutin's backfield at this point, or maybe they take a second, third, fourth round flyer on running back. We'll see. And then, of course, my team, Wan'Dale Robinson. I think we did talk about that a little bit last week, but I like that it's basically a 2-year contract for that, 4 years, $78 million, just based off guarantees. I'm not a big fan of the tight end Daniel Bellinger, just for the amount of money that we gave him. But he's with us for 3 years. We're letting Chiggy Okonkwo go, which saddens me, but hey, stuff's got to happen. We did bring in Austin Slotman at our center, 2-year deal, $9 million. Good money on that one. And then you want to talk about defensive line. We had mentioned the Jermaine Johnson trade. They signed Jacob Martin, 2-year, $11 million deal. Jordan Elliott. I love the John Franklin Myers signing. That's going to be fantastic. They trade basically 7th-round swaps to get Solomon Thomas, defensive line. I do like the 2 corners that we signed. Cordell Flott, 3-year, $45 million. Alante Taylor, 3-year, $60 million. So we're padding up the secondary. And for the longest time, I thought Tennessee was coming into the draft going to take one of these premier pass rushers coming in. And in a span of basically a week and a half, they have brought in basically 6 different guys to pad this defensive line. And, of course, more than half of them have worked with Saleh before. So now I don't know what we're going to do. At this point, I just want them to take the best available. I'm a little hesitant on Jeremiah Love, not necessarily the player, but in terms of the need for the team. I wouldn't mind getting some linebacker help or, safety help. Either the guys, Styles or Downs from Ohio State would be nice, but I'm very interested to see going forward. But, yeah, our division is making some moves, that's for sure, except for Jacksonville. They're content where they're at, I guess. So what's your thoughts on the Colts and your division rivals?
So as far as Indianapolis goes, I know that the Alec Pierce signing for the massive amount of money has been subject to a lot of scrutiny, and I think that's fair, and I would have preferred he not get that much money on an annual basis. However, not to defend Chris Ballard, but I do think that this signing was the right one. I know people see his route tree or view him as kind of a one-trick pony, He's very efficient. He has like, I think he had like 1,000, a little north of 1,000 yards last year, but he had the longest like average yardage per catch or something to that effect. I think Alec Pierce is capable of doing more, which is why he earned this money. When they kind of free up a log jam with Pittman, moving him out, and then now they get Alec Pierce in, I think he's capable of handling more of a workload, and that's what they're going to give to him. And the rest of the Colts receivers are kind of just role players. Josh Downs, guys like that. So Laquan Treadwell, he's more or less like a fifth receiver / punt return or gunner on the punt return team. He's a special teams guy. So, I mean, that makes sense to me. But other than that, Arden Key, he's kind of a veteran pass rusher. You get him, swap out Kwity Paye, who left. We get Derek Inati. It's fine, interior defensive lineman. I think the Colts have done a really solid job in free agency so far. Nothing that really sends me over the moon. The last bit I will say is in regards to Daniel Jones, who is getting a lot of money, but I believe he's tagged. So it's kind of a little bit different, I think, if you're tagged. But regardless, I'm fine to see Daniel Jones back quarterback next year. I don't mind it at all. The way he was playing prior to the injury was not one that required like a tremendous amount of like athleticism. He was just he was doing what Steichen told him to do, which was hit all his throws, make the right reads. He's not running around doing all this. His injury came from a non-contact injury. So I think his return from the Achilles injury won't be as impactful maybe as a player who relied more on his athleticism. Now, don't get me wrong, Daniel Jones is very athletic, and he does have the capability of making athletic plays. I just don't think if you watch the Colts a lot last year when he was playing, that's what they were asking him to do. So I don't know how much of a drop-off there really will be. As far as Tennessee goes, they're getting the band back together. Robert Saleh is finding all of these guys he used to have and signing him to the Titans. I think that's good. I like the Wan'Dale signing. I think he is an underrated player. Now, if he can stay healthy, that's a little bit different, but I think they're going to be able to use him pretty creatively within their offense. Obviously, Brian Daboll was his head coach in New York, and they have a prior relationship, so I think they're going to be using him a decent amount in Tennessee. John Franklin Myers, I think that's another good signing. I think he is underrated. I know I've been throwing that around a lot. It's kind of like signing somebody from Seattle's defense. When you get somebody from Denver's defense who was one of the best in the league last year, you're going to feel good about yourself, and I think the Titans got a good one with him. Other than that, you're just kind of filling out depth and role pieces. Nothing wrong with that. Texans, their big signing was Danielle Hunter. They also signed David Montgomery, who I believe we spoke on last week. Solid player. I like both of them players. They got Sheldon Rankins back, who is a pretty good defensive lineman. Foster Moreau from the Saints. He beat cancer, so that's great for him. And then E.J. Speed, who also is a former Colt. Good linebacker. I like that for him, and I know he's going to work well in a DeMeco Ryans system, who is a great, great, great defensive head coach. Reed Blankenship, I know he's part of the exciting Whites in Philadelphia. He signed with Houston. I'm not as big on him as others. I think he's a pretty good safety. I don't think he's a great player. I think he's a good depth piece. The Texans remain. They signed good players. I think overall they've had a pretty good offseason. And then I really don't have much to comment about on Jacksonville. As we were saying earlier, they just kind of did some re-signings, keep continuity around the locker room. I did think it was interesting them letting Etienne walk. Now, he obviously was going to command some money on the open market. I think he'll fit well into the Saints' offense. I like that signing for the Saints. I think it leaves the Jaguars' offense a little less dynamic, but does it matter that much? I mean, I think they really want to be more of a passing offense. ETN, he could catch, he could run. I think it'll just come across as their offense being less dynamic. But other than that, I think, all around, I think all of these teams did pretty good in the offseason so far.
Yeah, I just think Jacksonville, I'm looking at the cap right now, and this is, after re-signings and whatnot, they're bottom 5 in the league in terms of money, so I figured they probably hamstrung on the cap, couldn't re-sign him, probably wanted to. But then you bring in Chris Rodriguez, and maybe he's the passing down guy, and Tootin's the, early down guy. We'll see. But I think every team did what they needed to do to fill in some holes or keep some guys. So I'm not no team in our division, I would say, got worse over this offseason. I think we've all gotten a better upgrade in a roster. Maybe Jacksonville, you could sit there and say, they'll still be competitive. They'll still be really good. That defense is put together, and that offense has enough weapons on it. So the last team in the AFC with the West, besides Vegas making some big moves, everybody else was kind of restructuring, moving money around, that kind of thing. Denver Broncos, they did re-sign J.K. Dobbins, 2-year, $20 million deal. Phenomenal story, the fact, how many injuries he's come back from. They re-signed Jaleel McLaughlin. They re-signed Lil Jordan Humphrey. They re-signed Adam Troutman. Basically a bunch of re-signs on their end, keeping the gang together. Kansas City working some cap magic, bringing in a Super Bowl MVP Kenneth Walker on a 3-year deal, $45 million. Oh, that's terrifying. They re-signed Travis Kelce. He is playing one more year for $12 million deal. They re-signed Tyquan Thornton. Very nice deep threat option for them. They signed defensive lineman Kairos Tonga, 3-year, $20 million deal. They bring in Alohi Gilman, 3-year, $24 million deal. James Winchester re-signed. So keeping some pieces together, adding a couple in. Kenneth Walker with Kansas City, if they can get their run game going, and he's definitely the most talented running back they've had since probably prime Kareem Hunt in terms of this era. So that will be – I love Kenneth Walker. It sucks that he went to Kansas City, but I'll still root for him. Raiders. They sign some depth pieces. Some are interesting. Wide receiver Jalen Naylor, who's with the Vikings, 3-year, $35 million deal. Good cash amount. If Jalen Naylor never put up big numbers, but if you watched Vikings games, which I'm sure you've seen quite a few, he was just one of those wide receivers that he moved a little bit differently. He finds ways to get open. I think that's a good signing for him, and I think this will really – it wouldn't surprise me at all if he walks in and becomes the number one wide receiver there. They bring in fantastic center Tyler Lindenbaum from the Ravens on a 3-year, $81 million deal. Basically breaks the market on the centers, but when you're a bad team and you're trying to bring people in, you got to overpay. They bring in edge Kwity Paye from, I believe, the Packers. They bring in Nakobe Dean, linebacker, 3-year, $16 million deal from the Eagles. They bring in linebacker Quay Walker, who's a guy that I really wanted. They got him. They traded for corner Teron Johnson from the Bills. They re-signed Eric Stokes. They pretty notable names, to be quite frank. Some key pieces on some other teams they bring in. It definitely looks like they're hammering out this defense. Bringing a key guy on center. I do think potentially they go a little bit more offensive heavy in the draft, try to give Mendoza as many weapons as possible or give him some pass protection. We'll see. And then the Chargers re-signing Trey Lance. That's not a big deal. But they did bring in Keaton Mitchell, who could be an interesting piece in that running back room. They re-signed Trevor Penning, try to add some extra depth on that line. They bring in former Patriot Cole Strange on a 2-year, $13 million deal, solid guard. I think I mentioned last week that Tyler Biadasz, center signing. They re-signed Khalil Mack, 1-year, $18 million deal, phenomenal player, long-time player. They bring in Dalvin Tomlinson on the defensive tackle. They re-signed a bunch of their linebackers from Deion Leonard, Denzel Perryman, Delshawn Phillips. So Chargers kind of keeping the pieces together, bringing in a couple guys. Raiders going all out. Chiefs moving pieces. Denver keeping the gang together. Anything stick out? I think the biggest talking point would be the Raiders here. But any other teams in this division that you feel like jump out at you in terms of their free agency?
I like what the Raiders have done. I mean, they really have spent money this offseason getting some good players, and I think some players who make sense. Like getting Tyler Linderbaum for what they did, I think really nice player for them. Going to have a good impact on their offensive line, which is something they've struggled with over the past offseason or the past season. I know at one point last season they were starting Jordan Meredith, former WKU Hilltopper, who was an undrafted free agent, and he is like from Kentucky, maybe like the Glasgow area, I think. But I was like, man, that's who's starting at center for the Raiders? And no shade to him, but I was kind of like, he's an undrafted free agent, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't really have a lot of depth there. I also like the Quay Walker signing. I think that's really good. And also you highlighted Jalen Naylor. I was listening to a Vikings podcast earlier in the year, and they were talking about their cap situation. I can't remember what pod it was, so forgive me, but they were kind of like, I think Jalen Naylor is one of those players who can do more if given the opportunity. He's a good player, and if a team elevates his role within their system, gives him more opportunities, they think Jalen Naylor is a player who could break out, not be one of the best receivers in the league or anything, but definitely one that has a week-to-week impact, meaningful impact on the offense, and certainly toward winning. I think that is for certain. So I like what the Raiders did. They're setting up whoever their quarterback's going to be next year. I know they're probably going to take Fernando Mendoza, but they probably won't start him right out of the gate. But I think what these moves signal is that the Raiders are getting serious for whatever that means again. But they're getting serious about, hey, I think we had a missed opportunity last season. I think people expected them to be a little better than what they ended up being, which was horrible. They got the number one pick. I don't think they want to send Fernando Mendoza out there to the Wolves. He's not that kind of player. He's going to have to learn behind somebody, say maybe a Kirk Cousins or somebody like that. I wonder who they're going to sign at quarterback. I think that's kind of still open. But I like what they did, and a lot of these signings make sense to me. Now, regarding the other teams, one thing, Kansas City, Kenneth Walker signing, that's great. I think, Kansas City is Kansas City. They lost some pieces on defense, but Travis Kelce coming back, I know this isn't really that serious of a move. I mean, it's locker room continuity, but why? Give it up. Dude, what do you have to prove? I mean, are you're record chasing? What's going on? Not that I have to dictate what move he makes in his football career. And honestly, I'm kind of glad that he's not just signing with another team like, oh, I'm going to go play for the Bears for one random season and do that. I mean, I'm glad he signed with Kansas City. I just don't quite understand why he chose to run it back. The Chiefs are kind of like the Ravens, where they feel like they're a little bit on the other side of the hill. And I think they'll still be good. And if things break their way, they'll be a playoff team, and they have enough experience to do well in the playoffs. But I don't think they really feel like true contenders. They'll be contenders, but I don't think they're going to be one of the teams where, like the Rams were last year. I don't think we're going to blink and they're staring down the barrel of the Kansas City Chiefs. As far as the other two teams go, Denver, I think Denver's going to be good again. I don't really have much to say about their signings other than that, they're keeping the band together. I've used that phrase a couple times, but that's essentially what they're doing. Funny enough, I'm looking on overthecap.com. I noticed that Mercedes Lewis was a tight end on the Broncos last year. Crazy. Genuinely, what is this guy?
That dude will never retire.
I mean, when did he get drafted? 2006. Has this guy played 20 seasons in the NFL at tight end? This will never be replicated.
I'm pretty sure he's the oldest non-quarterback in the league. He's got to be.
This legitimately will never be replicated. Ever.
The Iron Man. The true Iron Man.
A tight end playing.
He just shows up and he's like, give me the minimum. I don't care. I am not done yet. And they're like, all right, fuck it. Why not?
You know what? Shout out to him. There's a reason he keeps getting re-signed. I'll say that right now. And if he still wants to play, I'm sure a team will sign him, especially maybe in the middle of the season if he doesn't get signed at some point this offseason. But Denver, I think a thing to watch for with Denver is the relationship between Sean Payton and Bo Nix, which has seemingly been strained. I know that Bo Nix got hurt. He didn't get to play in the AFC Championship game. Sean Payton is famously kind of arrogant. People are now discussing his personality out in public, personality as a coach more than his personality as a man. And I think him and Bo Nix are feuding a little bit. There's been some beef. I wonder how that's going to impact the Broncos next year with them, essentially bringing back their entire team. That relationship is the core of Denver's team now. I know the defense is really the core, but in order to win games, you need Sean Payton and Bo Nix operating on the same level. And I think that's something to watch out for heading into the season. Chargers, Khalil Mack coming back. That's great. I like Khalil Mack, like you said, great player. Other than that, boring. Show me something. I don't really care. Do something that is relevant and not boring. Win some games that matter. And, yeah, that's really all I have to say about the Chargers.
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to add on this in terms of losses to the team, and we've kind of missed part of this because of the trades and whatnot, but the Chiefs have lost Trent McDuffie, cornerback Jalen Watson, cornerback Joshua Williams, safety Brian Cook. So something tells me they're going to go into the DBs area for the draft because, man, that core is destroyed. Just having to let everybody walk like that. We'll see. If there's any team that's going to pull some bullshit out, it's going to be the Chiefs. But I still don't think the Chiefs are in the undisputed AFC team to beat again. I still think it's going to be an interesting run like it was this year, where it's like, all right, we'll see. NFC felt a little bit more narrowed. AFC was anybody's ball game. Speaking of the NFC, we're going to jump to the NFC East. I've already mentioned some of these with the Cowboys in terms of George Pickens, Javonte Williams. They did re-sign defensive end Sam Williams to a one-year deal. They traded for Rashawn Gary with the Packers for a fourth-round pick. Signed Adito Ogbonnia to help out on the defensive line. Signed Kobe Durant for corner. Keeping their special teams together. Brought in some safety help with P.J. Locke and Jalen Thompson. So Dallas, a little bit tighter on the cap space, not necessarily making as many moves that you'd like to see. We'll see how they draft. I think that'll be the biggest telltale sign of how they're going to be good, but how much are they going to improve this defense? That's my question. In terms of the New York Giants, with the regime change, bringing in Harbaugh, they re-sign Isaiah Hodgins. They bring in wide receiver Darnell Mooney, one-year deal, $10 million, underrated wide receiver. They bring in athletic phenom tight end Isaiah Likely to a 3-year, $40 million deal. If he can stay healthy, he's going to be their number 2 threat there. They re-signed a bunch of guys in the offensive line: Jermaine Elamuna, Evan Neal, Aaron Stinney. They bring in linebacker Tremaine Edmonds from the Bears, I believe, on a 3-year, $36 million deal, so a much better deal than it was the previous team. It'll be a solid middle linebacker piece for them. They do bring in Greg Newsome, very nice corner addition, 1-year, $8 million deal. Adding some pieces there with the Eagles. Nothing too crazy here. They did come to terms on another 1-year deal with Dallas Goedert, so he's back in town. They did decide to give a pretty hefty extension to Jordan Davis, 3 years, $78 million, which very interesting with all the mounts that they got to feed on that defensive line, what it'll look like in the future. They do bring in Arnold Ebiketie. I know I butchered that name. Linebacker, 1-year deal, 7.3. Add some help on the outside. They bring in Tariq Woolen at corner. They bring in Jonathan Jones at corner to help pad out that defensive piece. As you know, Philly's kind of in, I don't want to say cap hell, but they're always constantly moving and shifting stuff around. So we'll see. You could make the point that the Commanders probably made the most moves in this division this year. They do bring in Jerome Ford, former Bearcat, played with Cleveland. Not a phenomenal running back, but definitely showed that deserves to be in an offensive rotation. They also bring in Rashad White, so that could be an interesting tandem in there. And, of course, they have everybody's favorite dark horse running back, who I can't even remember, but everybody got fooled in fantasy last year by him, including yourself, I believe.
JCM.
Yeah, there he is. They do re-sign Traylon Burks. You can keep him. They bring in Van Jefferson. They did take our tight end Chikazum Okonkwo, 3-year, $30 million deal. They do sign Laramie Tunsil to a 2-year, $60 million extension. They bring in Algredi, 2-year deal on the offensive line. They re-sign a couple guys, Wiley Scott for O-line. They do bring in a former Patriot on the Super Bowl team, attending team, Clavion Chason, 1-year, $12 million deal for the edge. They bring in Charles Amine, who 1-year, $4 million deal. They signed Odafe Uwe, 4-year, $100 million deal. So they're definitely padding up the defensive side of the trenches there. They bring in Tim Settle, 3-year, $24 million deal. Linebacker Leo Chanel, 3-year, $24. Cornerback Amik Robertson, 2-year, $16 million. And then safety Nick Cross, 2-year, $14 million deal. So they have padded up. They kept guys on the offense, bring in Chiggy, bring in a new running back tandem, and they just went in on the defensive line part for sure. So they feel like they definitely made the most moves. They need to bring in some fresh faces because half of that team is 1 foot into a retirement home. So what's your thoughts on the NFC East?
I've been on record about this before. I like what Dallas has done. I think Dallas is going to be a team to watch going into next year. I like the Rashawn Gary signing. I like the signing of Jalen Thompson, and they bring back Malik Hooker, who used to be a Colt, just randomly. I just want to throw that in there. But I think Dallas is going to be a team to watch, and probably maybe my favorite going into next year. I don't know if I'd bet on that. Not favored to win the Super Bowl, I want to be very clear, but favored to potentially win the NFC East. I saw some memes about the Eagles, and it said the Eagles and Howie Roseman's offseason strategy was to resign absolutely nobody and just lose their whole team. But they did in fact re-sign Jordan Davis, who's one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL. Michael Carter, they re-signed him. They do lose Reed Blankenship. I think they could still upgrade there. And they got Tariq Woolen, who's a good player on a Seattle Seahawks team that just came off a Super Bowl win. So, again, the Eagles, I throw them in that Ravens-Chiefs category. They're going to be good. How good, it remains to be seen. I think they're kind of on the back part of their championship window with this iteration of guys, but their current roster makeup is such to where the Eagles are going to be competitive and probably still a playoff team. As far as the Giants go, New York's interesting. New regime, John Harbaugh. I like the signings they've been making. Maybe last week I said that I still don't think the Giants are going to be that good, but they'll probably be better than, terrible. I think after what I've seen from New York, I think they have a little bit of potential to do better than even that. I think the Giants are setting themselves up to. I could see them being like a 6-7 win team potentially next year. And a lot of that has to do with some of the moves they made this offseason, but also moves they're going to make in the draft. So it's hard to really peg them down, but I like what they've been doing. They get back Devin Singletary. They get back Evan Neal. They get a fun piece, Patrick Ricard from the Ravens, who is one of the better fullbacks in the league. I know he was a big part of what Baltimore under John Harbaugh was doing on offense. It's going to help Jackson Dart stay clean in the pocket. He's also going to be able to move the line in close yardage situations. And then finally, the Washington Commanders, who have been talked about a whole bunch on this podcast. I think Washington is going to rebound a little bit next year. I think this is going to be one of the better divisions in football. It generally is, but I think kind of the floor fell out of it last year. The Giants showed flashes. Jaden Daniels got hurt. I think if they remain healthy and both teams show some improvement, I think they can be pretty good. Rashad White, I think, is an interesting signing for them. He's better than JCM, and a lot of these guys they've been trotting out there. They've also made some signings on defense. Amik Robertson from the Lions. I like that. I think that's a good signing. Odafe Owe, Kentucky Wildcat, Otega Owe's brother. He's been a pretty good player. Was at the Chargers last year, I believe. He was with the Ravens before that. So overall, the Commanders, again, a lot of their team, it hinges on health, and specifically health of the quarterback. So I don't really have a lot to say about them. But I do really like the direction that Dallas is heading in. If Dak Prescott can keep his head clear and his nose clean this offseason, because there's been a lot of rumors swirling around about him. He got, I think, divorced from his wife or separated from his girlfriend. I can't quite remember. So that might throw a wrench in my Cowboys optimism. But that's really all I have to say on this division.
Hey, Dak Prescott revenge tour. Here we go. No, it's going to be a really interesting division. Commanders have made the moves that they needed to. Philly's trying to stop the bleeding, but they still have an overall really talented roster. Giants, new regime, added in some key pieces. Let's see. This is really going to depend on the health of some of the guys that got hurt last year with the running back, quarterback, and just the offense as a whole. I do feel like them losing Wan'Dale Robinson might hurt them a little bit more in terms of short, creative passing game, but we'll see. And then we'll just have to wait with Dallas, see if they can fix that defense up. All right, the NFC North. You want to talk about a team going in? It's Chicago. Man, some of the signings that they have. So they are basically third to last in terms of cap space available right now, just with some of the moves that they made. So they bring in Khalif Raymond to help supplement some of that wide receiver core, 1 year, $5.1 million deal after getting rid of DJ Moore. They re-signed Braxton Jones, tackle, Jordan McFadden, guard. They bring in tackle from the Browns, Jedrick Wills. They bring in, with the trade, Garrett Bradbury with New England for the center after their center unexpectedly retired in his late 20s. So they already got that position replaced. They re-signed a bunch of guys on defense. Daniel Hardy. They bring in Devin Bush on a 3-year, $30 million deal to play middle linebacker for him. They re-signed DeMarco Jackson. They bring in safety Kobe Bryant from the Seahawks on a 3-year, $40 million deal. Re-sign Elijah Hicks. Bring in Cam Lewis at corner. basically signed Contavious Street, so they're padding up this defense. They're shoring up this offensive line. Chicago's not going anywhere. And then the rest of these teams in this division, Vikings, Packers, Detroit, are a little bit definitely cap strong. I knew about the Packers cap pretty well because I knew they were going to lose a lot of defensive pieces. But with the Lions, they do bring in, feel good story, Teddy Bridgewater coming back in. They do sign Isaiah Pacheco to a dirt cheap deal, 1 year, $1.8 million. With how good Detroit's line is and him not having to be the main back, maybe we see him. I don't think he's going to fill the exact shoes of David Montgomery, but I think he could be a solid replacement to do what needs to be done in short line, goal line situations. But I think that is Jahmyr Gibbs' backfield at this point. They're going to run him till the wheels fall off. They do bring in a center, Cade Mays. This was a problem last year, 3-year, $25 million deal. They bring in offensive tackle Larry Borum. They traded for Juice Scruggs, tackle with the Texans. They signed former Colt cornerback Rocky Ya-Sin, top 10 name in the league, and signed safety Christian Izien. In terms of the Packers, they signed Sky Moore. Why? I don't know. They bring in offensive lineman Sean Ryan, re-signed 3-year, $33 million deal. Bring in Javon Hargrave, 2-year, $23 million deal. They made the trade for Zaire Franklin. They signed quarterback Benjamin St. Justy for 2-year, $10 million. The Vikings, which is kind of surprising that this hasn't been talked about enough because I think the Max Crosby trade has taken over the free agency talk, but Kyler Murray does sign a 1-year deal with the Vikings. And in my opinion, I think he walks in week 1 and he'll be the starter, to be quite frank. I think he's just going to beat J.J. McCarthy outright. They revised Aaron Jones' contract. They re-signed Eric Wilson, 3-year, $22 million deal. They bring in James Pierce at corner. They re-signed Tavere Thomas, Andre DePaolo. And basically you got 3 teams that are trying to add a piece or two and keep the gang together as much as they can. And you got Chicago just throwing money at everything. So it's NFC North is going to be interesting, but does Chicago make another step forward here? What's your thoughts?
The Bears are making good moves. I think they're probably – it's so hard to say whether or not they're going to be favored going into next year. I mean, maybe marginally, but they still have a very, very, very tough – division. I think them filling a lot of filling in around the edges, bolstering their depth is really good for the Bears, and they're going to need that kind of continuity going into next year with Caleb in year 3. Team I was really perplexed by, or has been making a lot of moves, but maybe in the opposite direction, is the Minnesota Vikings. They signed Kyler Murray to be their quarterback, which is interesting. It makes sense. I do think it makes sense. But they've been shedding salary like crazy. There's been a lot of teams who've been able to kind of pick the meat off the bones, so to speak, of the Minnesota Vikings, like the Bengals signing, Jonathan Allen. So I'm really interested to see how they do next year, because didn't they finish 9-8 last year? It was a fraudulent 9-8, but they did have talent. So I think they're going to take another step back, and part of that is just because they've been shedding so much salary. Green Bay remains a solid team. Zaire Franklin, Javon Hargrave, those are good additions. Sky Moore for wide receiver depth. Green Bay, no matter what they do, it really just comes down to Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur. And I think the floor of the Packers is very high, but their ceiling is not too far above the floor. And I think that's the interesting part about the Packers. And the last team I'll comment on here is Detroit. Detroit has also been kind of shedding some pieces that they that have been like a core part of their team for the past couple of years. David Montgomery being one of the prime examples of that. I do like the Cade Mays signing from the Panthers. He was a really good player in college, and I think he's going to be a good player for the Lions, who need offensive line help. They also sign Juice Scruggs from the Texans, and I think that was a good move. Rock Yassin, very fun. Just kind of rotational piece. I just like saying his name, so I'm just going to – that's why I said it right there. You know, the Lions are a team similar. I throw them in that ever-expanding group of teams who are just on the other side of the hill a little bit. And will they be in the playoff mix? Sure. But I don't know if they've done enough to really warrant getting on top of the division again. I think it's Chicago's division to lose. But overall, I don't hate any of the signings Detroit made. I just think they've lost too many core pieces from where they were at.
I mean, to be quite frank, I think it's Chicago and the Lions, and I think I'm going to knock the Packers down a pedestal, knock them down a peg just because of how much they've lost. Rashawn Gary, Romeo Doubs, Rasheed Walker, Quay Walker, Kingsley Enagbare, Elgton Jenkins, Nate Hobbs. It's just, I feel like, man, as a Packers fan, you knew coming into this season that potentially this was going to happen. And this is where I get frustrated personally, just with any NFL team. But if you know you have all this coming up, this is kind of the Bengals point I've made a couple times. Trade the pieces away when you can. Get something back. I'm sitting here, I'm like, you've got 5 starters on your defense gone. You're not going to replace that in 1 year. You've lost arguably your healthiest wide receiver in the room. He's gone. I'm not saying I'm out on the Packers, but I don't think they're a better team than what they were last year. And Detroit has got a very, very good roster. Chicago's going all in, and the Vikings are having an identity crisis. And they've also let some really good players go on with, hey, Jonathan Allen, he went from them. They lost Javon Hargraves. They basically lost both of their starting defensive tackles. Harrison Smith's gone. Their center, Ryan Kelly's gone. They lost Jalen Naylor, Eric Wilson, linebacker. It's just Packers and Vikings lost more than they gained. The Lions kind of held it together, and the Bears are going in. So if I had to pick, I'd go to the Bears. But I think Detroit will be close. It's gonna be the division that doesn't get decided till like week 18. I feel like. We have 2 more divisions left. NFC South. We're going to start with the Falcons here. They did bring in Tua. What a wild-ass combination to have Penix Jr. and Tua in the same quarterback room, and at this moment still have Kirk Cousins. Absolutely wild. They do bring in wide receiver Jahan Dotson from 2-year, $50 million deal. Former Commander, I believe former Eagle as well. They do sign Alameda Zacchaeus, formerly with the Falcons. Pretty solid rotational guy there. They re-sign Austin Hooper. Kyle Pitts got that franchise tag. They do sign Azeez Juliar, 1-year contract. Deshaun Hand, Cameron Thomas, 1-year deals. Chris Williams, 1-year deal. Christian Harris, 1-year, $3 million deal. This is a team that, to be quite frank, they gave up this year's first-round pick to the Rams to get 2 of their defensive ends last year who were showing very bright spots in their young career, and one of them has, due to outside reasons, like personal life reasons, he will probably not step foot on the NFL field again, if I had to guess. So you've lost the player and you've lost the pick, at this point. So who knows? With the Falcons, it's Falcons. No matter what they do, it always seems to blow up. Carolina, they bring in John Mechie, David Moore. They do sign tackle from the Packers, Rasheed Walker. Re-sign Stone Forsythe. Bring in center Luke Fortner, 1-year deal. They do sign edge Jalen Phillips. 4-year, $120 million deal. He got paid. They bring in Devin Lloyd. Great signing, 3-year, $45 million deal. They re-sign Isaiah Simmons, re-sign Caleb Evans, Nick Scott, J.J. Jansen. So Carolina making some positive moves, fortifying some of that defense up, bringing a little bit of extra protection, making sure some weapons stay in Carolina. I like what they're doing. The Saints, that's so funny that they signed Travis Etienne, 4-year, $52 million deal. If you had to say, not Alvin Kamara is a very hard player to replicate or to, let's just say, assign a comparison, but I think you could put Etienne in that category. They do bring in Noah Fant on a 2-year deal. Guard David Edwards. I don't have the years on it, but they got $15 million per year. They signed Caden Ellis, linebacker, 3-year, $33 million deal. Some nice, nothing crazy from the Saints, but definitely feels like there's a couple more additions than negatives. I'm interested to see what Shuck does with ETN. With some of this offense, because the Saints were coming to life kind of at the end of the year. You're like, okay, there's something. Saints fans are excited about this season. They want to see where it goes. And then the Buccaneers, they re-signed Kate Alton to a 3-year, $30 million deal. They signed Kenneth Gainwell to a 2-year, $14 million deal. He had a phenomenal season with the Steelers, and I do think that he's an upgrade over Rachaad White. So that'll be an interesting duo with the Buccaneers. They sign Al Quadin Muhammad at the edge, defensive line, Deshaun Robinson. They bring in linebacker Alex Anzalone. I think the more notable piece that we're all aware of is longtime Buccaneer Mike Evans is no longer with the team. He is with Tampa Bay. Not Tampa Bay, San Francisco, similar color scheme, which is interesting. I'd like to see that dude's hamstrings next to that electric power plant to see how long that holds up. But it's one of those you hate to see a guy that's been playing for a team for so long, at least for us, in terms of he's been with the Buccaneers since we started our fantasy football league since high school, and you see him move. But if you're sitting it down and looking at the roster as a whole, with them bringing in Egbuka, Chris Godwin still got something left in the tank. The other guy, who I can't remember his name, also came back from a neck injury last year. Mike Evans being gone hurts, but I don't know how much production they're going to really lose. They'll lose some. I'm not saying that they won't, but I feel like the hole there is not as big as some people think. I think they have some really talented wide receivers. I think they probably did offer Mike Evans a deal, and he just got a bigger contract from the 49ers. So we'll see. What are your thoughts on the NFC South, the perpetual 9-9 winner of this division?
Yeah, I'm right there with you on Tampa Bay's wide receiver depth. I think they could afford to get rid of Mike Evans. I know they probably tried to keep him in the building, but ultimately, with Chris Godwin, with Emeka Egbuka, even though he didn't start off or finish the year as he started off, I think they've seen enough to be like, all right, we don't have to keep, running Mike back out here, especially with the injury he suffered, Mike Evans. I thought they probably decided internally, hey, it's time to move on, or at least let him seriously test the market. I think there's plenty of players in that Tampa Bay wide receiver room who could replicate his production in the short term, meaning next year. And I'm gonna go over to the Saints here. I like what the Saints are doing, and I don't know. We're gonna have to coin a term for this. Like, people who like Tyler Shuck. I'm one of them. Am I a Shuckaholic?
Hey, I'm with you, man.
I like him.
I'm rooting for him.
Yeah, not just I know he spent the last year of his college football career at U of L. He's 26 years old. He's on the older side, but I think that's why Kellen Moore and the New Orleans Saints took a chance on him, is because of his immediate potential for impact. And seeing him in a system with Justin Herbert in Oregon, playing for Jeff Brom at Louisville, he played in all of these different systems, but one thing was clear, and I think this is probably where people in the draft may have underrated Tyler Shuck, even though on its face he suffered a lot of injuries. He was a little older at 26. Is that he had played in multiple efficient and he played in multiple pro-style kind of offenses in college. Oregon, Louisville, like we were saying, Jeff Brom, the Mario Cristobal, like these guys playing in those kind of systems just tells NFL talent evaluators if you're able to get this guy in the room, if you're able to protect him, he's probably going to be able to do something. And I think Tyler Shuck, with the pieces that the Saints went out and got, Travis Etienne's going to take a lot of pressure off of him. I like that signing a lot. On defense, they went and got Justin Blackmon, re-signed him. They got Noah Fant, who was really a nothing burger with the Bengals this year. Kind of a forgotten high draft pick. Used to play for Denver. Got traded to Seattle. Never really found his place in the league. I think he could provide some good blocking support along that offensive line. Maybe even a little bit of pass-catching support if he stays healthy. I really like what the Saints are doing, and I think the Saints could win the division. I genuinely do. I don't think there's that much room between them and Tampa Bay and Atlanta and Carolina. I think Carolina's primed for regression. I do not think Bryce Young is going to be the answer for them going forward. And although they did sign Jalen Phillips, which is a nice move, I think that's good. Devin Lloyd, again, a nice move. I still think that they're a little far away from being serious contenders, even though they did push the Rams to the limit at the end of last year in their playoff game. I don't want to dismiss that. I just think with the moves that New Orleans has made, and also I want to give a shout-out to Atlanta. I think that if their quarterback situation was a little better, I would be higher on the Falcons. I know we run back the Kyle Pitts thing every year, and it's still a little weird and murky. I still think he's a good player. I still think he could break out, and I don't mean like break out like I could see a Kyle Pitts season, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. That's really all we want out of Kyle Pitts. You know, I don't think we're asking him to be Tony Gonzalez at this point in time, but I do think we could ask him for a little more production. But you know how he gets more production? Get him the ball. And we need a quarterback in Atlanta to get him the ball. Tua, maybe. That's interesting. We'll see. But what I will say is it's a better situation quarterback-wise than had been previously. You know, I don't want to throw Penix under the bus. I still think Penix could be an NFL caliber quarterback, but it just goes to show that if the Atlanta Falcons are willing to take a chance on a player like Tua, who again has made Pro Bowls in the past, is a good player, but I think we all recognize that. Like, let me ask you this really quick before I get back to the Falcons. Would you take Kyler Murray over Tua right now? I think you're muted.
My bad. Yes, I would.
And I think that says a lot, you know, because they both had success in the past. They've both been high draft picks. They've both been a little banged up. I still think Kyler Murray is more dynamic. He's able to do more things on a football field. And that's not to say that, hey, Atlanta gets Tua in here and maybe he's finally the guy if we have this offense set up right. Get Kyle Pitts the ball finally. Get Bijan Robinson the ball in space like what Tua had done with Devon Achane in the past. And then prior to that, Raheem Mostert. Maybe we're going to get Drake London a little more looks. We're not going to be as explosive down the field, but we're just trying to get the ball into the playmaker's hands. Maybe he can do that. I still think it's up in the air. You got a massive quarterback battle coming, but it just shows me that that signing means they do not trust Michael Penix going forward. And after 2 years, that just, I mean, what really more can you say? So all in all, this is a fun division. It's kind of a fraudulent division every year. We always sit here and be like, oh, I kind of like what they did, and I kind of like what they did. But at the end of the year, we know it's probably going to be 11-6 maximum for one of these guys. And if I'm staking my wagon to any one of these dudes, it's the New Orleans Saints. I think they have a lot more room to grow if Tyler Shuck stays healthy, and I really like what the Saints are doing.
Yeah, the Saints are a better team than some people think. Tampa's still going to be in the mix. I have a Bryce Young stat for you. How many games do you think, this is just last year, how many games did Bryce Young throw for over 200 yards?
4.
You are correct. You've heard this stat before.
No, I haven't. That was a complete shot in the dark.
All right.
I just think maybe a few. There's no way he was throwing for that many.
No, we're on the same boat. We've talked about this before. We are not fans of Bryce Young. Not that we don't want him to be good. I just don't think he's the answer. We'll see, but I feel like I've been saying we'll see for too long now for a first overall pick to be saying that. One more division, the NFC West.
Oh boy, best division in football, folks.
Yeah. So we're starting off with the Cardinals, the rock bottom of the division. They do sign a interesting running back with Tyler Algier, 2-year, $12 million deal. From all reports that I've read, that they are going to keep James Conner, so that's a pretty interesting two-back tandem right there. They do sign Gardner Minshew, so he's presumably behind Jacoby Brissett, but hey, not a bad backup right there. They bring in wide receiver Kendrick Bourne, 2-year, $10 million deal, solid addition. They sign guards Matt Pryor and Isaac Somolio, 3-year, $31.5 for Isaac there. They bring in Elijah Wilkinson to help out with guard as well. They signed Roy Lopez, defensive line, 2-year, $11.5. They re-signed LJ Collier on that defensive line, 1-year, $2 million. Defensive lineman Jonah Williams. They keep a lot of their special teams, kicker, punter, long snapper. So not necessarily huge moves, but definitely a couple nice pieces that I think that went under the radar there. Algier's a very good committee back, one of the best in the league, I would point out for that. He kind of reminds me of Zach Charbonnet a little bit. Their style. Kendrick Bourne is a very, very underrated, productive wide receiver for him, just to add padding into that room. He probably walks in and he's a number 3 wide receiver playing in the slot. Makes sense. With the Rams, not a whole lot of moves just because of the cap situation and then contracts coming up, but they do re-sign Tyler Higbee to that 2-year deal. Re-signed David Quisenberry. We already mentioned the trade for Trent McDuffie. They do sign Jalen Watson to a 3-year, $51 million deal, so they have, their weakness was their DBs last year, and they trade for one with Trent McDuffie. I already mentioned last week the signing or re-signing of Cameron Curl at safety. They bring in Jalen Watson, so they basically patched up the toughest part, or I should say the biggest hole on their team. I already mentioned Mike Evans going to the San Francisco 49ers on a 3-year deal. They bring in offensive tackle Verdarian Lowe, 2-year, $12 million deal. Bring in Brett Toth to help in with that tackle position. Carlia Davis, $3 million deal to defensive line. They trade with Dallas to get Osa Odigawuzie. I butchered that name. That's all right. Very solid addition to that defensive tackle after them getting rid of a couple of their defensive guys themselves are letting them walk. They re-signed Luke Gifford at linebacker. They re-signed Dre Greenlaw on a 1-year, $7.5 million deal. They signed Nate Hobbs from Green Bay on a 1-year, $4.5 million deal. Good deal. They decided to keep Eddie Pinheiro. I just mentioned the kicker because I like Pinheiro. He's interesting. Like the name. And then the Seahawks, this happens to every team that wins a Super Bowl. You just see the roster explode. They do bring in running back Emmanuel Wilson, $2.1 million. They re-signed Rashid Shaheed. That one was obvious. We just didn't know the money or the years. 3-year, $51 million contract that's set. They re-signed Josh Jones on the tackle position. They re-signed Joshua Joby, corner, 3-year, $24 million deal. And they signed Rodney Thomas as their safety. While I'm looking up all the key losses for the Seahawks here, what are your thoughts on this division? And relatively quiet overall, but what's your thoughts on the moves?
Yeah, I mean, this division is already the cream of the crop. a lot of these teams are pretty well established. 3 of the 4 teams are in Seattle, San Francisco, and LA. So you're not going to see a lot of big splash moves. I will say I liked the San Francisco 49ers signing of Mike Evans. I thought that was an interesting move for them. It's going to be a nice change of scenery for Mike Evans. If he's able to stay healthy, I think he could be a pretty good player there, pretty good impact player. But overall, you didn't really see a lot from San Francisco. I think their main focus is keeping the guys already on the roster healthy. I think there's still some key players who are still unsigned. Juwan Jennings, he's probably going to go somewhere else. He's kind of emerged for them as a good wide receiver. He's probably going to try to test the market and get some money. Rams cap situation, I mean, that's really what it comes down to for them, as you were saying. Not a free agent signing, but the Trent McDuffie trade, just another great Rams move. I mean, typical Rams, they need help in the defensive backfield. Who do you go get? One of the best players from one of the best defenses in the National Football League. Build out that depth. They re-signed Cameron Curl, who people weren't sure he was going to re-sign with Los Angeles. I kept hearing that maybe he was linked to a few other places, ultimately re-signs with the Rams. Fun fact here, Tyler Higbee, former WKU Hilltopper, played 32.2% of his snaps last year, and he is still on the Rams. I don't know what he is doing to Les Snead. Has he captured his kids and, held them hostage on a Zeppelin or something? Like, I don't understand how this guy keeps getting signed. I mean, good for him, but he hasn't really been that much of an impact player in quite some time.
Yeah, he's hanging around. I mean, I guess, yeah, he's probably done some business, some illegal activities to the team to make sure he stays on with them.
Yeah.
But we have wrapped up all the divisions here, and I just thought of this now. Let's just pick one for each category. Pick the biggest winner of free agency and the biggest loser. Do you have 2 teams that come to mind?
Okay, so we're saying entire National Football League, 1 winner, 1 loser.
Or if you want to put up a couple, that's fine.
Okay. If you have yours, go ahead.
I'll go ahead and throw it out there. So I think one of the biggest, I'm going to start with losers, is the Green Bay Packers. Hands down, they have lost multiple starters. I've already mentioned on the defense. They basically, the Nate Hobbs one is the one I want to point out the most, because prior to this season, they give him a 3 to 4 year deal. A lot of money, and they cut him. They didn't trade him, they cut him. So dead cap hits their team hard, contributes to the cap, basically bottleneck that they have. They lose all the Kwity Paye, Quay Walker. They lose Elkin Jenkins, who's been a long time solid offensive guard and center for him, rotational piece. That guy can play both. They lose Romeo Dobbs. This is a team that only recently has been a little active in the draft. I just don't see how the Packers even finish at the same finish line that they did last year. And I do think that, I'm not saying that they're going to have a bad season, but this is what's going to lead to them getting a new head coach for next year. I'm going to go as far as to say that as they will be a new guy in the front, and there will be some organizational shift because of the lack of foresight, unfortunately, from their GM. In terms of biggest winner, that one's probably the toughest one. I think the easiest one to pick would be the Raiders, but I'm not going to take the cop out. I'm actually going to say the Commanders. I think the Commanders have made some tremendous moves on the defensive side. Odafe Owe, Leo Chanel, Amik Robertson, Clavion Chason, Charles Aminu. These are all guys that are going to contribute immediately to this defensive front. They over the past 2 seasons, they've lost a lot of talent, but with the amount of money, and a lot of these deals are really good. They're not busting the bank for anybody, but these are very, very solid, good players. Adafe Awai is the only one that really jumps out of the page in terms of money signing, but they bring in terms of offensively, they re-signed a couple guys. De'Ami Brown had some moments. Traylon Burks somehow had some moments with them. I'm not going to compliment them on that. But their running back room, even though it's not the biggest names, Jerome Ford, Rashad White, that's a huge upgrade. And Chiggy Okonkwo, they had to do something at the tight end position with Zach Ertz. I mean, I watched basically the last play, probably of his career last year when he got hurt in the end zone. But bringing in Chiggy Okonkwo on a $30 million deal, 3 years, it's not a bad deal. He's still very young. He's very athletic. He's big body. He can block. They have re-signed or signed some guys on the offensive line to give some padding. And I just like what they've done to make themselves more competitive in that division. Do I think they're going to win it? No, but they have a lot of guys that they're piecing together this roster, especially for this year, to not be a cakewalk like they were potentially last year. This is a team that I think is going to surprise some people, not in terms of playoff push, but they're going to get some wins that you will remind them of what they did 2 years ago.
So for me, and I hit on this earlier, my loser was the Minnesota Vikings, or my loser is the Minnesota Vikings. And it's kind of a self-enforced losing situation for them because of their cap situation. They've had to shed so much salary, and they've lost key pieces on their defense. Again, it's the Vikings are interesting because they've had a couple 13-win seasons over the past few years, and they never really did anything with it. They got rid of their GM in this past offseason, so maybe there was a little more turmoil behind the scenes than we were initially led to believe. I know they have a good head coach, but now they're kind of in, people talk about the Colts quarterback situation a lot. How about the Vikings quarterback situation? I don't feel like it's really talked about enough. They let go Sam Darnold. He wins a Super Bowl. They had old Kirk Cousins there for a while. They draft J.J. McCarthy. He gets hurt. They tried out Carson Wentz. Now they're rolling out their Kyler Murray. It's a little similar to the Daniel Jones situation. I don't feel like anybody talks about that enough.
You're not wrong, because at least the Colts can say they kept doing the carousel, but they never had the quarterback. The Vikings have had 2 quarterbacks, and they let them walk. Now, you could sit and be like, oh, Kirk Cousins didn't do too well with Atlanta. I'm like, well, Kirk Cousins, when he was with the Vikings before he tore his Achilles, at one point, he was in an MVP conversation. And then, with Darnold, he's been his season until the last 2 games. You can make the argument that it might have been the most efficient Vikings quarterback led potentially since Brett Favre was in town. And they just let him walk because they think that they're going to hit on everything. And, it kind of reminds me of what San Francisco did, what they did with the Trey Lance thing, but they got lucky with Brock Purdy being there. Well, they don't have a fallback on that. You spend this high draft pick on McCarthy, who, at the time, you could say he didn't do anything special at Michigan. Did not impress. Wasn't, let's say a physical specimen, but they're always a pro-style offense. But you never definitely had a great supporting cast there. And he's had some moments with the Vikings, but, man, he's just – the injuries have killed his development. And with Kevin O'Connell, who's the quarterback guru, and all of a sudden, oh, we got a quarterback that's not working here. Now the hot seat is hotter because it's like, well, who else? They already got rid of the GM a month ago, so now it's like, well, that problem's gone. What's the next problem if we don't have the success that we want to have? They're going to look at the coach. That's just part of it. I agree with you. It's definitely self-imposed. Their quarterback situation, although it's not getting the talk that I 100% agree with, like the Colts were getting, I'd say give it another season. Now it's going to ramp up, and it might even be louder than the Colts, because the Colts was just kind of like a ha-ha. Now the Vikings are kind of like a, you did this to yourself. This is a tiny bit different situation. So I could see this, because I don't think the Vikings, they're not going to win the division with whoever they got at quarterback. And there's going to be some unhappy fans, and it's going to lead to some type of change.
I know a lot of Vikings fans. I know one Vikings fan really, really, really well, and there's no way he's happy with the direction they've taken this offseason. As far as my big winners, I don't – you mentioned the Raiders being an obvious winner. I agree, and I think it was an atypical Raiders offseason in that I really like some of the moves they made. I don't want to go in and take the easy way. You picked Washington. I think that's another good one. I don't know if they're really true winners, but two teams I want to highlight. First, your team. I think Tennessee had a really good offseason so far. I think they hired the right coaches, and I know we're talking about free agency specifically right now, but I like the moves they've made, even around the periphery. I think they've got good depth. I like the Wan'Dale Robinson signing. It's all dependent on health. I like the John Franklin Myers signing. I like the coaching staff. I like the I just really like what Tennessee's doing, and I think they're going to be a little bit better than people may expect next year. They've had some money available to spend, and they spent some of it. So now we'll see how that translates on the field. But overall, I think the Titans have done pretty good. And the other team I want to highlight, and I always find some way to shoehorn the Cincinnati Bengals in there, but I genuinely do think that so far at key positions of need, minus the backup quarterback signing, which I was not a big fan of, but I think the Bengals made 3 really good signings, genuinely. In fact, I think they've made 3 of the best signings in free agency so far. Not like tippy top, but probably top 20 moves. And then you could put the Jonathan Allen one, a little outside of that. But I think the 3-year contracts for Brian Cook from Cincinnati, went to UC, from the area, good player, played on Kansas City. He brings experience. He brings leadership, good ball skills. I think that was a major position of need. Geno Stone was a complete bust back there for them, and I think now they have some competence at safety. If they're able to draft someone like Caleb Downs and put him, and I know maybe that's a little bit of a luxury to do. Maybe they have some other positions they'd rather address. I really like the Brian Cook signing for Cincinnati. I think it's going to be good. And then the other one is obviously the Boye Mafe signing, 3 years. Somebody described this on a podcast a couple of years ago, so I'm going to bring this up now as far as how the Bengals operate in free agency, is that, and Trey Hendrickson is the perfect example of this. And maybe I even talked about this last week, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but they sign like middle-class free agents. They're never going to pay, unless they have a guy in-house, they're never going to pay some guy a bunch of money at the top of the market. Their strategy is to find valuable players in the mid-range of a position who they feel are undervalued and who they could potentially lure over with like a 3 to 4 year deal. Trey Hendrickson was one of those guys. He was underrated for the Saints, kind of flew under the radar. They gave him an opportunity to lead a pass rushing unit, and he ran with the opportunity, and then they didn't re-sign him early enough, and then this became a whole contract dispute. With Boye Mafe, they did kind of the same thing. Good value for a player who's coming off winning a Super Bowl. Not only did they sign a player who just won a Super Bowl, but also Cook comes from Kansas City. He has experience winning Super Bowls, I believe, with Kansas City, Steve Spagnuolo. So they got 2 guys from veteran defenses who are very impactful. And then the other one, Jonathan Allen, He's been a good player in the league for a long time. I think if they pair him with a guy like a DJ Reader, if they're able to lure him back and they hit on a draft pick, such as maybe they get Caleb Downs, somebody dynamic like that, I think he's probably going to go a little earlier. Now, all of a sudden, I'm kind of looking at the Bengals defense, and I'm going, okay, I see this now. I see the vision. They have guys. If they can rely on some improvement from Shamar Stewart, who was a virtual zero last year, and get continued marginal improvement from Miles Murphy, now we're looking at a unit that's kind of okay. Like, will it give me a 15, 16, 17 range? Maybe even could overperform that. I like that for them if they can keep the quarterback healthy, if Joe Burrow can stay healthy. I think that's a big if. But to finish out my kind of Bengals thoughts, I think this division is completely up for grabs, and I would not rule out any team except maybe the Cleveland Browns. You may be a little higher on Cleveland than I am. I just think their quarterback situation, it's hard to really project them out, and so it is what it is. But as far as Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, again, here they are. If they have to make the right moves, but they're kind of in the mix. I think Pittsburgh's going to be relatively about the same. So if you can all stay even, there's a chance to strike, and it's going to be coming down to the players who can, or those divisional games, which are going to be so important. So big winners for me. I think Tennessee did great this offseason, and I think they're looking at a much improved season next year. And I think the Bengals maybe flown a little under the radar in the national media, but I want to give them their flowers too. I think they've done pretty good so far, minus the Josh Johnson signing.
In terms of the ceiling for the Browns, I think the ceiling is 8 wins. That's what I'm talking about if I'm higher on them. I'm not saying they're going to make a run, nothing like that, but I that is a very talented roster. They just have the worst quarterback room in the entire NFL, and I don't think that changes. I will add real quick, I'm going to play the villain here, one more team that I think made some really positive moves in the same division is the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think in terms of, let's just say that this all depends on Aaron Rodgers coming back, but if he does, I think Michael Pittman is a fantastic combination with how Pittman is, what he specializes in. He's definitely a reception guy, find the zone, makes tough catches. That is going to be the guy that I feel like Aaron Rodgers will rely on more than DK Metcalf in this situation. Rico Dowdle, man, I'm just a Rico Dowdle guy where I think him walking into the Steelers, he is going to be the most explosive running back they have had since Le'Veon Bell. And then, keep Cameron Hayward in. They bring in Jamal Dean, resign Asante Samuel, Jaquan Brisker, Darnell Savage. I just see, the Steelers were not a bad team at all last year. It was just, you could watch that the defense was good, overpaid. They failed at times, but it's like, okay, they added a couple key pieces in there. And on the offense, if they could just get a little bit more firepower, which they did, they bring in Michael Pittman, who's going to be he's going to move the chains. And what Kenneth Gainwell was by far the most explosive running back for that team last year. I think Rico Dowdle is hands down better than Kenneth Gainwell. And they got him on a great contract. So I think not that the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to finish as the 1 seed or anything like that, but I think they have the opportunity to beat any team on any given Sunday in the entire league if it all shapes out. And I will say with their new head coach, hey man, when he walked into Dallas, he looked phenomenal. He looked like it was the right hire. Maybe he walks in, the regime change, maybe it responds really, really well to a veteran Super Bowl winning coach like that, a different one, a different personality, and maybe it just all clicks. We'll see. That's just one team in the division, in the AFC North, that I'd be like, if we want to talk about a team maybe making a small jump to put them ahead of the rest, it might be the Steelers. That's the one that I think have made at least, and I'm not saying I don't like the Bengals signings, I do, But I feel like if we're talking about where is each team starting, let's say the Steelers are here, let's say the Bengals are here, and they both made a jump kind of situation. I still think the Steelers overall talent-wise, as a whole, not individual players, has more talent than the Bengals and has more talent than the Ravens at this point. So I'm not going to sit here and say this is my division pick early, but I like what they're doing. We're going to have to wait till the draft. That being said, it's a lot of football talk. I want to let you. I'm going to set you up for this one. So the World Baseball Classic has been going on, and it's been, even though I haven't spent as much time as I would like on it, apparently this has been a very, very interesting classic leading up to this point. Just with some minor controversies and the teams that are in the semifinals right now. So coming in the quarterfinals, Dominican Republic has beaten Korea 10-0. United States has beaten Canada 5-3, and they are meeting each other tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And then on the other side of the bracket, you had Italy beating Puerto Rico, who will now be facing Venezuela, who knocked off Japan. So I want to let you have the floor and kind of describe what you're seeing, maybe the historical context behind it, some of the controversy, which I've heard a little bit of, about how the U.S. got to this point and maybe how they played against Italy in their own pool. But take the floor.
So the World Baseball Classic, I think, is having a moment. And last time it happened in 2023, it also had a moment. It culminated in the United States facing Japan in the championship game, where Shohei Ohtani famously struck out Mike Trout to secure the victory for the Japanese. Those were the top two teams in the world. You could throw the Dominican Republic kind of right there too. And actually, at that point in time, the United States was the defending World Baseball Classic champions. Fun fact, Nate Jones played on that 2017 team. But I think right now, this is becoming a premier sporting event. Not like the World Cup. I'm not going to be like outrageous like that. But what's interesting about the World Baseball Classic right now is that all of the good players from Major League Baseball seemingly want to play in it. The Japanese players have historically done it, and the best player on the planet is Japanese. They generally have a really good team. The Venezuelans, that's a baseball-first country. Ronald Acuna, amazing player. He's leading the Venezuelan team. They have a lot of other guys like Willie Abreu on the squad, good pitchers like Ranger Suarez. They're a very stacked team. They're still in it. Dominican Republic, famously good at baseball. They're a stacked team. Fernando Tatis, a bunch of guys on their roster. Then you have the United States, who Aaron Judge, Bryce Harper, the list goes on and on, Paul Skeens. So there's four teams right there, not even counting the Japanese and the Koreans and the Puerto Ricans. And actually, speaking of controversy, there was a controversy earlier because Francisco Lindor, arguably the best player on the Puerto Rican national baseball team, was not allowed to participate because there was some kind of insurance policy, or he couldn't get some kind of insurance from either Major League Baseball or the New York Mets to play in the series. That kind of hampered, I think, Puerto Rico's ceiling. They have a great, great team. I want to give the Puerto Ricans all the love in the world for their performance so far. You got Cuba in there. You have other smaller teams like Israel, who's now out. You have like Taiwan. You have Brazil. You have Italy, famously. The European teams aren't very good, and Italy has kind of been the cream of that crop, which is cool to see. So anyway, I say all this to say this event feels like a major deal. It feels like people are actually caring about this, even maybe casually. There's been a lot of viral moments from this series. And when this started in 2006, I think it was kind of an afterthought. It was just something, people kind of did, or it was lingering in the background. It happened before the season. There were people in Major League Baseball and team owners who did not want their best players playing in this tournament, instead focusing on getting ready for the regular season. Now that is not the case, And because so many of the players are international players, it gives them even more leverage because are you going to really tell Ronald Acuna Jr. he can't represent his home country, Venezuela, in essentially the baseball version of the World Cup? He can just go tell you to kick rocks. So I really like that players have autonomy and have chosen to do this. And what's really cool about this event is I think in America, people think of baseball players, and I'm saying this in an actual negative way, as like kind of like stoic, emotionless, hit a home run, blank face around the base, just kind of like America, rah, rah, yeah, like baseball, yeah, kind of thing. They took our jobs, kind of bullshit. And it's really cool to see the Latin teams, how enthusiastic they are. And I know people have talked about this before, but like, dude, if Puerto Rico hits a home run, those guys are going crazy. They're throwing the bat like 50 feet in the air, and they're doing like backflips, and they're cheering, and it's so refreshing to see. And you could just see the kind of like blank nature of the Americans as opposed to these other countries. And I think it's giving people a really diverse idea of how the game of baseball should be played, because for such a long time it's been kind of marred with these questions about the unspoken rules, the unwritten rules of baseball. And some of them are legitimate, others are just kind of gatekeeping protocols that keep people from having fun. Some of them are to prevent fights, but I think as the game gets more international, people are moving towards having more fun. I think the Latin players are certainly the biggest embodiment of that. Now, as far as the event goes, the viewership numbers have been incredible for this. And I would only think they would continue to get better. I mean, for the pool games specifically, Fox Sports, who's put on the game. So, by the way, these games are on like FS1. You kind of have to look for them a little bit. 3.17 million viewers that's just the Team USA and therefore pool games. Pretty solid. Solid for an event that's not, marquee as some other international sporting events. When they beat Mexico, average audience of 5.02 million. Really nice audience numbers there. And I think if Team USA makes it to the championship round, there's going to be a lot of viewers on that. I'll tell you what, personally, I would be watching the semifinal game between the Dominican Republic and the United States tonight. I think that'll be a really good game. You don't get to see that quite often. Paul Skeens is taking the mound. I think it's going to be really cool. That's going to draw a lot of viewership. And one of the things I think is interesting about this tournament, besides all the teams I was kind of listing off, is you could really get a scope of, baseball is a niche sport. It's probably in, second or third place in the United States, or fourth, or however you want to measure that. Now, it used to be the pastime. We're a football country now, and that's fine with me. The basketball stuff, I think, is a little fake and inflated, but whatever. But you really get to see that sport's impact on certain populous countries in the globe: Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, Panama. All these countries that America has been involved with in the past have really developed baseball cultures, and they're all pretty unique, and I think it's cool to see that. You mentioned the Italian team beating Team USA. I mean, genuinely, that has to be one of the biggest upsets in the history of baseball, just in general. Now, I will put a little bit of an asterisk on that. There are only 2 players born in Italy on the team. There may be only one player who plays in Italy's Serie A or Serie A professional baseball league. The rest of them are more or less like Italian Americans or Italian Venezuelans or Italian, Canadians, what have you, in other countries. But by and large, there's still kind of a plucky group of underdogs. There's still some good players there, and it just goes to show you how much better the Italian team has gotten over the years. And talk about a unique clubhouse atmosphere. The Italians, every time they'd hit a home run, they'd come in and take like a shot of espresso. I mean, it's just hilarious. These guys rule. They rule so hard. So shout out to Italy. And overall, I think this event has been a smashing success for the sport of baseball and getting people more involved. And I think baseball will, if it doesn't lock itself out, which freaking it will, because this is how it is. This is how it is. Just kicked in the dick yet again. But baseball really has had some momentum recently, and I think the success of this event only adds to that momentum.
Yeah, it's definitely come across, just from my standpoint. I'm not a big baseball guy, but fair amount of people around me are, and they're tuning into this. Whereas for me, like, I was aware this was a thing, but I was not. I was like, I never really paid attention to it. Did a little digging, did a little research myself. And it is, the fact that you're saying, hey, 5 million views, like that's, for something that's relatively new, that's more than a quarter of the people that watch the NBA Finals for this, in terms of from America. But in terms of growth of the sport, this is a fantastic idea, and it really does develop some storylines, like you said. I think seeing how other countries, how they act during baseball can maybe open it up a little bit for American baseball, just in terms of the MLB kind of potentially lacks some, I don't want to say boring parts of it, but it just relaxes the code. Because, there is a unspoken code to baseball, and that's more prevalent in baseball than any other sport in the world, at least to my knowledge, where there is some unwritten or unspoken rules that you have to follow. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that you would think that the most interesting matchup for the finals would be the United States and Venezuela. Not just because of a team composition and playing, but obviously what has happened in the past 3 months. Just some storyline. I don't think any of that would bleed over into the game per se, but it is. I think that's interesting for, let's just say, for me, who's not a baseball savant. It's like, yes, I understand how the game of baseball is played. I played it for quite a few years growing up, but for somebody who's tuned out of the professional baseball world, I think that's at least interesting. They do this every 3 years?
It's a little weird. So they had it last in 2023, and then prior to that, they had it in 2017. I believe before that, it was 2013, 2009, and 2006 is the first one. So every couple years, I don't know if it's on a strict rotating basis like the World Cup or something like that, or the Olympics. I'm a little unclear on that. But I think as far as for me, yes, I would like to see the United States versus Venezuela. If the Dominican Republic beat us tonight, and I hope they don't, but if they do, I think honestly, you really can't go wrong with any of these matchups. I think the Italian team is a lot of fun. I think if the Dominican Republic played Venezuela, that would be a really, really good matchup. So, I mean, the Final Four, this is a strong Final Four.
Nice. So tell me when, I should know this myself, when is opening day for baseball? I'm kind of curious how they do this and how it stacks up to our sport calendar.
So opening day for baseball is March 26th.
Oh, wow.
So it's coming up quick.
It's basically, it's 9 days.
Now, these guys have been all kind of primed for the season already because they've been playing in the World Baseball Classic, and they've had spring training going on too. But you really haven't heard much about spring training because this is going on, essentially. Not that people would seek spring training out in general. That's just kind of how it's been. But yeah, the opening day is March 26th. The Reds play, I don't believe they actually, yes they do, they play Boston at Cincinnati on opening day. I may go to that, I may not. We will, that's still kind of up in the air. But
that'd be a really good opening day. I
Yeah.
love opening day in Cincinnati.
it's a holiday.
It is a holiday for anybody that, for whatever reason, if you are listening to us and you're not from the Cincinnati area, the Reds are close to every Cincinnati every Cincinnatian's heart. It's very rare. You definitely get some odd looks if you don't root for the Reds, even if you're not a baseball fan. It's just one of those, like, if you want to talk about potentially the most culturally impactful sport in Cincinnati, it's baseball. And it is a huge party. They have a parade. The streets are shoulder to shoulder. The restaurants down on Riverfront there are insane. It's an absolutely fun time. And they have it set up wonderfully, especially right there with, on the main street right there in downtown, where they have this giant screen outside of the stadium with the Reds that basically will play the game as well. So it's just a massive party. Something that I truly, truly do miss. Even though I'm not the biggest baseball fan, it's always a fun time. People take off of work. And if I was up there, I'd probably do the same and just go have fun for a day.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've actually never got to do the parade, but I have been to the game a few times. I've been to 2 straight opening days. We'll see if I make it a third, but if I'm not, I will definitely be out there having fun at the banks and in Covington or wherever. So yeah, I would echo what Logan said. Definitely come and check it out. It's a really cool, unique, kind of sports-based holiday in this region. And then, so to segue a little bit, the last thing I wanted to talk about here is, we're in this war with Iran. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but what I will say is I may have even said this last week on the pod. I got the opportunity to cover Donald Trump coming to northern Kentucky. So last Wednesday, I can't remember what exact day it was, President Donald Trump flew into CVG, Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport. He went up to the Reading neighborhood of Cincinnati, Ohio, went to Thermo Fisher Scientific, which is, I think, like a biomed, something like that. Biomed company. I can't exactly put my finger on it. But, he went up there. He gave a talk. There were national media there. They were only allowed in the press pool. After that, he essentially had a rally-style event at Verst Logistics in Hebron, Kentucky, right outside the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport. So I just wanted to kind of tell you guys about my experience doing that. It's actually the second time I've been able to cover a president coming to Northern Kentucky. Joe Biden was the other one. He came here in January 2023. So Trump came in to Northern Kentucky, went up to Cincinnati. He was on his way back. I, for that day, was tasked with covering his visit. I had to show up at Verst Logistics 9:30 a.m. with one of my colleagues at the newspaper. Funny enough, so there are already people lined up outside, a bunch of Trump fans. I don't know if you all have ever been to a Trump event, but there's always people, kind of lined up very early. Their lines go around the block, and definitely later in the day that was the case. But for the media, we were just kind of allowed right in. No security, nothing. They're like, hey, come on in. If you're in the media, come on in. Went in. The room was set up, and you had your, media fence and a little stage behind the fence where all the TV crews, 2-tiered stage where all the TV crews were. Every news channel you could possibly think of. CNN, Fox News, NBC News, ABC News, CBS News, Newsmax, all the local stations, WCPO, WLWT, Fox 19, Local 12, all of them. Stations from Lexington, like Lex 18, WDRB from Louisville, they're all there. Stations from other places in Indiana, Ohio. Then you had newspapers and print publications, famously, you had us, Lincoln KY, you had the Cincinnati Enquirer, you had other, the Dayton Daily News, you had The Economist was there. I believe even maybe the New York Times was there, although I didn't get to meet anybody from there. But so anyway, this is a major, major event. And we go there, 9:30, set up. We get kicked out. Not actually kicked out, but we're like, hey, you have to go. Leave all your stuff because we have to have our drug dogs and bomb dogs and everything sniff everything. That's fine. We get kicked out. About, I think it was 2:30, we were allowed back into Verse Logistics. And this time there was a line. It was pouring rain. Dude, there was a line all the way around this building. Like, literally, it was insane. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in line in the rain wearing MAGA hats. And if you were in the media, we got to... We had like an own separate media line, and there were two or three metal detectors they set up at kind of like a choke point in a hallway, and we had to go through that. And it was like I would call it like going through the airport or, going into a sporting event. They kind of wand you down, you go through the metal detector, whatever. And then we were allowed in and we were allowed to go back to our stuff. Now, what I thought was so fascinating, and Secret Service did a great job. They did a great job. But I thought it was fascinating because maybe there's different protocols for this, but when Biden came in, I felt like security was much more like stringent. And you would think that wouldn't be the case because Trump like almost got shot on national TV. But all we had to do was go in through a metal detector through Secret, Service, which Biden, we had to go in early, drop off our stuff, kind of do that. So it seems like that's standard presidential protocol, but we had to go through they ushered us through like 3 different security checkpoints, different ID checks, all of it. It just felt like way more strict, way more stringent. When Trump, we just had to go through like a metal detector. So I was like, why is it that way? Anyway, we got in, we're set up, we're waiting on him. I'm chatting with people from, national newspapers, whatever. Finally, this place is packed. Finally, he comes. Nicholas Sandman, if you all may remember, that's a name drop. He was the Covenant Catholic High School student who made international headlines when he was on I think he was on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., where he was like smiling in a MAGA hat, and a like Native American activist protester kind of guy was, drumming right in his face, and he was kind of smirking at him, and that became this whole big ordeal. He was there. He said the national anthem, I believe. Then they had a singer there whose voice kind of cracked during the national anthem. And then you had a bunch of different Kentucky state officials talk. Russell Coleman, the state attorney general, Allison Ball, the state treasurer. You had Michael Adams, or treasurer, I believe she's the treasurer. Maybe she's the state auditor, actually. Then you had Michael Adams, the Kentucky secretary of state. You had Ed Galrine, the guy who's running against Thomas Massey. He's a former Navy SEAL. And then Trump finally came. And it's still surreal seeing Trump in person because I've seen him in person a couple times. And these events really don't change that much. If you've been to one Trump rally, you've kind of been to them all, I guess. And they've been the same for like about 10 years. He comes on stage, he does his thing, he's like riffing like a comedian, and we're doing so great, we're doing so well, blah 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 blah. Just a couple notes from his speech. One, when he okay, so this is, and I'm not making a political statement. You can like Ed Galrine, you can like Thomas Massey. This is not a political statement. This is just an observation from me. So, and Polymarket and Kalshi have odds for Thomas Massey versus Ed Galrine. I don't think people really knew who Ed Galrine was, nationally at least, until this speech that Trump gave, until this moment. So it was like 53-45. He had closed the gap pretty good, at least on Polymarket or Kalshi, to Thomas Massey. He had started to close the gap. And he went up there, and Trump said he needed a warm body to beat Thomas Massey. So already Trump is kind of like jabbing a little bit. I don't know, like he said he was straight out of Central Casting to run against Thomas Massey, who Trump said he quote unquote did not like. We all know about all of that. Ed Galrine goes up there, and he just didn't come off very, I don't think he came off very well. And he had this one viral moment that I saw going around Twitter where he said something so... It was so cringy. He said something to the effect of... and Trump is standing right there, mind you. He's literally right next to this guy. There's cameras on him. There's thousands of people. He goes, Mr. President, Thomas Massey stands with the ladies of the View. And then he repeats it. He goes, Thomas Massey stands with the ladies of the View. But Mr. President, we stand with you. And it was very cringy, and it just didn't land. And I checked the other day on Polymarket in Kalshi. The odds were moving like this, like together. And then they completely diverged right after that. They literally, he dropped like 15 points on that gap he had closed.
Damn.
So talk about crazy. And the other thing that was interesting is Jake Paul was there. Okay. Jake Paul was there. Trump pre-endorsed Jake Paul for office. Head tattoo. He had a tan suit on, massive pit stains. He goes up on stage. Yeah, he gives kind of a regular speech. It was fine. He's just like, I see kids in the crowd today. They're the future of America. Kind of boilerplate stuff. Trump endorses him, whatever. And I just want to say, Jake Paul, and this is not a comment on him or his personality or anything. It's like seeing a leprechaun in real life. I don't know how else to describe it. Like, obviously he exists. Like, he's a real person. But, like, this guy's been on the internet for like 10, 12, 15 years, whatever, that we've been aware of him. I mean, I remember watching if you can dodge a car, you can dodge dodge a ball, you can dodge a car Vine. Like, that was Jake Paul in hindsight. So nuts. So anyway, nobody else looks like him. Like, beard, head tattoo, the hair, tan suit. It's like seeing a leprechaun in that when you're looking at him, you're like, I can't believe this guy actually exists. Like, I know he exists, but I'm sitting here looking at him with my own two eyes. It's like surreal. You have to kind of like pinch yourself. You're like, what? And then to make it even more insane, Donald Trump is standing right next to him, who is the president of the United States. And it's still been 10 years, and it's still like, I mean, we're in war with Iran, and it's still like, I mean, I'm 28 years old, and it's still kind of gross. Like, man, Donald Trump is the president, and he's endorsing Jake Paul for public office, and I'm like 200 feet away, or not even, like a football field away from this guy. I mean, I watched this guy almost get shot on national TV like 8 months ago. It's fucking surreal. So anyway, eventually, we do our thing. I write my article. We leave. It took forever to get out of there. It was pouring rain. It was a different kind of event than Biden's, for sure. Biden was introducing or touting like the bipartisan infrastructure bill where they paid for the Brent Spence Bridge, essentially, and that was all interesting. So anyway, that's kind of my day covering Trump. It was very interesting. Oh, and the other thing I want to note this too. Dr. Oz, who I think is in charge of Medicare and Medicaid now, so famous TV doctor, Dr. Oz, so Trump is up there. It's like 15 minutes into his speech. Pretty high energy from, what we've seen in the media, I think, lately. It's pretty typical Trump stuff. He's got this, like, these, like, bleachers behind him, okay? And it's filled up with a crowd of people. And so if you're on TV, you see Trump at the podium, and he's speaking in front of this crowd of people. A person passes out right behind Trump. Like, you could see this. The person, like, faints and falls down. And when I was there, Trump just, like, stopped speaking, and he's, like, looking around. Like, he's just kind of, like, looking at the stage behind him. I thought somebody had, like, was getting, like, kicked out for protesting or something. And, no, this person passed out. And he was passed out for, like, 6-7 minutes, and they couldn't get him up. And then they finally are like getting him up, and they're like carrying him through the aisle. You know how like if you're at a sports stadium or like going to a movie theater and you're like passing by people in your seat, you're like, excuse me. That's kind of how they were like carrying him out just like weaving through people. It's like dead silent, or it's kind of murmurs in the crowd for like 15 seconds while they're carrying this guy out. And Trump's just looking at him, and he just kind of mumbles, "We love our first responders, don't we, folks?" And then the people just go, It was nuts. And I thought it was so funny. That's how he chose to break the silence. And then, not the same guy, another guy passes out right in front of the television camera, like set up in the back. Trump doesn't notice this guy. He keeps on doing his thing. There's another guy that passes out. Dr. Oz comes in from the crowd and is like nursing this guy to health.
That's fucking wild.
And this is happening like 15 feet in front of me. It's surreal. I was like,
so, Dr. Oz, Jake Paul, Donald Trump.
Yeah, Nick Sandman. I mean, I honestly, I was like, what is happening right now?
That's a fucking fever dream.
It is. I was like, I have to kind of, like, what is happening? How am I here right now? Like, am I dead? Like, what the? And we're at war with Iran. Like, everybody is like, just like, it's so surreal. So anyway, that was my experience covering Trump. I just wanted to put my thoughts out there. Any reaction to that? I mean, it's
just wild, man.
It is wild.
Like the basically his entourage that he shows up with. Like you said, hey, there's a lot of big issues going on. Jake Paul, would you like to say something to the word of the people? You know, it's like, yeah. I can just imagine. I'm like, what is Jake Paul doing in Northern Kentucky to give a speech? Like, that Dr. Oz is traveling with them. Like, what the hell? I mean, Sandman kind of makes sense just because of the area. You know, that one does. But the other two, I'm like, what the hell? You think Trump's like calling up Dr. Oz, be like, hey, you want to come with me to Cincinnati? He's just, all right, cool. Be like, hop on, you know, hop on a jet. Let's get going. No, that's a wild opportunity, man. I know everybody with their job has pros and cons with just different situations of what you do, and that's definitely having a unique experience like that is really cool. Not even like a political, well, it's like the fact that you got to cover Biden, you got to cover Trump, you've gotten probably to cover many other interesting people in different events. That's super cool, especially that you're kind of on the media side of it. You know, even though it's not like, you know, I'm not with CNN, but the fact that you're just part of it and you can kind of see from that angle, you know, just unfiltered, basically.
It is very interesting. I mean, I think I've gotten so many opportunities to do interesting things like that through my job, just as like a local newspaper reporter. It's very strange to have. You get to be in the room a lot in this job. Whereas if I wasn't or was, I can't talk. If I was not in this role, I would not be able to get in those rooms, you know, but you're given access essentially, which is very interesting. Yeah, I just want to reiterate like seeing Jake Paul in real life. It's like, dude, what in the world? I've ran into influencers before. Obviously, I was like only seeing him from a distance because, you know, we're back in the media area. He's up on stage. You know, I've run into influencers before. I met Eric Dunn, the Viner, at a Jags-Bengals game a couple of years ago, Thursday Night Football. I went to Vancouver, Canada, and met political YouTuber JJ McCullough, who's got like 1 million subs in Vancouver. That was super weird. Very strange experience. I'll probably... I think Vancouver is an interesting place, but... Yeah. I just wanted to share that with everybody. So, you know, if our friends or whoever was curious about that event and what it was like to like go into the event and be a part of it, and, you know, leave and all of that, see Jake Paul, see Nick Sandman. That's just kind of for them. But the overall fun experience. I've been lucky enough to cover 2 presidents, so very, very cool.
Yeah, that's a cool story, man. For real. I'm glad you shared that with all of us. Pretty cool insight on that because we'll never get to hear it from that perspective. That being said, that's a pretty good wrap-up point right there.
I think
this is about 3 hours long. I knew this was going to be a longer episode just because of all the free agency news, but we got through the topics we wanted to. That being said, we'll kind of play low. We'll message each other and figure out what we want to do for this upcoming pod. I feel like we've been very lucky the past 3 weeks. We really haven't had maybe a loose plan, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, the sports world is making news for us. This is easy. So we'll figure out the next topic here. I think part of it will definitely be probably a little bit of discussion of March Madness because I know, Selection Sunday is, I want to say 30 minutes if it hasn't already happened.
It's actually already happened.
Yeah, I was going to say, I couldn't remember if it was 6 or 8 o'clock, so I got to check that out. Was Kentucky a 7, 8 seed?
They were a 7 seed. They drew, I think, Santa Barbara or Santa Clara, maybe Santa Clara.
And then is Louisville 6 or 7?
Not sure.
I can look this up. I was just curious because I know I was kind of looking at projections earlier today.
They probably were.
They're about in the same range.
But I think we're going to wrap this up here, everyone. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share, and we will be back here next week with another pod.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the weekend and a good week.
Touche.
Peace.